Yeah, for those that were in here last night, I got a bad headache yesterday, really bad, and that knocked me out. I had to lie down. I just laid down. It was in my eyes, and it worked over to my cheekbone. It's like I thought I was getting. But yeah, it was really bad, just my whole head. And I thought I've had flus like that where it's just in my head. The pain was all in my head, so I thought, well, I'm gonna lay down, just watch some stupid TV shows for a while. I realized when I was laying there, it's the first time, and I've been here almost 6 years. It's the first time I've actually laid down on the couch just to kick back and watch TV. It's been that long. I haven't ever done that in the house I'm in now. It's like, wow, busy, busy. So anyway, I still had it when I went to bed, and I was out for my lady went to bed at 11 and didn't get to sleep till like 12:30. So I got it. So I woke up though and I felt good. I had sleep and my headache. Anyway, that was,
Chris, do you think that um these weather changes can cause like a form of depression or something?
yep, yep, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can cause depression, stress, because it depletes your body of minerals and
Um,
vitamins. It can be lack of vitamin D3 from sunlight.
yeah,
Sunlight's always good to get out in, especially fresh air. If you can get out, even just sitting outside and having coffee or something, watching the birds and stuff.
I went out this week and got some sun exposure, but then I came back with this cough and I don't know what happened and but I,
Were they spraying?
there was spraying in the sky and
Yeah.
I went to an appointment and I came back with this scratchy throat, dry cough. No, a nothing burger cough. I don't know how to explain it. It's like there's no reason for me to have a cough if you
Well,
know,
it could be something you picked up at the clinic you were in.
yeah.
That doesn't take much. Excuse me, are you doing any nicotine?
I'm sorry.
Do you take nicotine? Do you take the patches or do you smoke?
Yes, I put on an one the night before on my left shoulder. It's right above my sugar sensor,
Uh-huh.
and that's on my arm. And because I use these little sensor machines, and
I've seen those. Those are pretty cool.
yeah, they're pretty convenient, um, and I went and I took my hydrochloroquine and ivermectin and zinc
Good.
with the 100 milligrams of zinc
Good.
because they come in 50 milligram tablets. So I took two of them,
Did you
and
take any C? Vitamin C?
the tea.
Vitamin C.
Oh no, no vitamin C. But I did have the tangy drink in the
Oh,
morning
good. Good, good.
and the other one for the I think the joints. And you know what I've noticed
Uh,
that since I started taking this, oh, what's it called? This
FX, as
os
osteo.
osteo. I've I've been less achy.
Yeah, that's good. You must be rebuilding really quick. Um,
Oh,
yeah, it's good. There's good stuff in there. And
yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. I've noticed, I heard you talking. Maybe were you in the chat last night? I heard you talking at some point, and
Yes, I was. I think I might have gone to bed after Chuck Missler,
uh-huh.
uh, the Bible study, the first one. I started getting really drowsy and tired. Because I woke up at 5 in the morning,
Oh wow.
and so I didn't really quite rest in between.
Yeah.
And so by the time Chuck Missler finished all the studies, I was like very intrigued by it. And by the time he ended, I just couldn't. I couldn't hang on.
Needed to sleep. You know, you heal up when you sleep. What I was going to
I
say is that I could hear your voice. I couldn't hear what you were saying because I was in the other room
oh,
watching TV, but your voice sounded stronger, and it sounds stronger today too.
oh, yes.
So,
Yes, I just can't get this depression feeling. I don't know if it's because of my spine or
give it
I
time.
don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, give it time because I've noticed bouts here and there about myself, and I'm like, where's that coming from? What is going on?
Uh,
It's usually some kind of an imbalance from what I've with myself. I've noticed that
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
EFAs. Are you
What,
taking the EFAs?
I'm sorry.
Are you taking the gel pills that came with the Healthy Start Pack?
Yes, I am.
Good. You
I
give
am.
those some time, and they help. They are better than any drug for depression. And usually,
EFA.
according to, yeah, it says, I think it says EFAs on the bottle, but
Oh,
you take those religiously because they say that those will help more than anything with depression. And they did studies 25 years ago, and they said they work better than any pill, any, what do you call it? Any chemical stuff you get. Yes, we'll pray about it. We'll pray about it for you.
thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
You
I
bet.
was gonna ask you, and because when it tries to creep up, like the mind has a mind of its own,
Yeah.
and it just wants to take you on a little trip, thinking about little sad things, and you have to shake them off, with the word, and keep your eyes on Jesus. I mean, you have to like really fight it off because it'll try to like put its
Yep.
arms around you and,
Yep.
oh, look, the sadness, and like,
It builds
uh
on itself. Yes, it builds on itself. You know, it's almost like a satanic, when you think about it, a satanic
yeah.
attack where it's trying to drag you down with more bad thoughts. And every time, maybe to counter that, every time you get that in your mind, think of something good that God is doing for you, or think of something blessed, something way you've been blessed before, and force
Mm-hmm.
that out of your head because that's definitely, it's much easier to go negative than it is positive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but force your brain to go, wait a minute, no, because it refuse to accept that as being what your brain's trying to do. And what it sounds like a low, it might be the low EFAs. It's hard to say, but it's, you got to fight that because you can work yourself into a really severely depressed state by continually thinking about the bad things. And I know you know that, and you are fighting it by asking
Yeah.
prayer for that. And that's awesome that you're doing that. So we'll see. We'll get God involved. And
I did take EFA like 30 minutes before I eat.
yeah,
And
it's a food. It's the oil is actually a food, and it does
yeah.
take a while to kick in. I mean, you might need to be taking it for a couple months before you really notice some big differences, but it does help with that. If that's the cause of it, that
Yes.
helps with it. And yeah, it's good stuff. So
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you, Chris.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. Refuse to accept the brain, because the brain does that. Mine does the same thing. I don't know why, but I guess that's
Yeah.
how we're wired.
It's a receptor of something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's annoying, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like it's like a radio,
Uh-huh.
of its own, and it changes when it wants to.
Yeah.
And sometimes like when you get into a car and the radio's already set to turn on when you turn on your car, and you already have it in like either elevator music or country music or worship music, and you hear something you don't like, what do? You just change it, right? Like,
Yep, exactly.
I'm gonna put it on classical music, or I'm gonna
Right.
put it on jazz, or not this honky tonk.
Says I have a friend who was a tomb guard. He told
Put
me
it
the
on
message was
something,
there.
Huh?
put it on something that makes you feel good.
Oh yeah, something positive,
Yes, 100%.
Christian radio or something.
Just sometimes you have to remind yourself to do that. You forget. So yeah,
Oh
we'll be
yes,
praying for you. We'll be praying for you. So
yeah.
Alrighty.
Thank
Yes,
you.
you bet. Anybody else has anything like that, just, you can put it in chat. If you don't want YouTube hearing about it, and I can put it out here on the list and just make it, generic, so if you wanna keep it private, that's good too. Up to you guys. So, who would like to pray this morning? And here's the prayer list we have. You can skim over it if you need to, but I sure hope Track Pipe Runner's getting some relief from that. There's the list we have, and whoever would like to open us up with prayer is more than welcome.
Chris,
Uh-huh.
I wanted to ask you something.
Sure.
What is your opinion on oil of oregano, and do you know if do you know if it's good for the kidneys?
That I don't know. I know it's good for certain things and people swear by it. I've never used it. I've never had to. I use alternatives that I already have on hand. But I've heard that people have good results with it. And it's something I guess we could look it up after we get done with the Bible study and see. Or I'll look it up
Okay.
on another, I've got a different screen. I'll pull that up and I'll look while we're listening to this word.
Oh, I wasn't sure if it was like an antioxidant for like kidneys or something.
It's an antibacterial, antifungal type thing.
Oh,
And so it helps. It's kind of like I've got silver, so I don't need and silver is the most effective of all, so I don't need the oil of oregano.
silver.
Yeah, it tastes terrible, so it must be good. So,
Yeah, I've
Shihei, I didn't know you used that, Shihei. Helps with stomach ache. Do you dilute it with anything?
who
I don't,
me?
no, I was just asking Shihei.
Mm.
Eye form. Oh, pill form. In the oil? Oh, you take it like in these little gel cappy things? What do you call those? But yeah, okay, I didn't know that. Okay. In your stomach, that way you bypass having to taste it. Good idea. I guess if you need it, it's something to try. I'll just do it really quick right now, see if it's hard on the kidneys. Give me a moment. Oh, this is interesting. I recently put that out. It says, I put in there, is oil of oregano hard on kidneys? Anytime you have a question about something like this, you need to look at several different sources because some of them might be just fly-by-night people. And sometimes it's the government people trying to steer you away from things that are good for you, as you know they do. It says a recently published study revealed that oregano vulgare essential oil, which is oil of oregano, exerts antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity and protects kidney tissue DNA damage from exposure to aflatoxin. So it is protective of certain things in the kidneys.
Okay.
Antifungal.
Is it harmful in any way towards the kidneys?
I'm looking for that, and I'm not. Oh, okay.
Like, I mean, it could be okay for like regular kidneys, but what if somebody like is on stage 4 renal?
Yeah, it says in high doses it can be, so you don't want to take a lot of it. Why would you be taking it? What do you want to take it for?
Somebody in PSV was suggesting it, but I wasn't too sure. I read something on it when they posted a web page for it,
Mm-hmm.
and I read through the benefits of it, but it supports blah 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 and antioxidants, it supports the kidneys. I don't know if it's the liver or whatever.
Well, you know what I would do? I would, are you taking the vinegar, apple cider vinegar and water? Have you started doing that yet?
No, I forgot about that.
Okay,
But I
that's something I think will help dissolve deposits you've got in your tubes that are blocking your kidneys. I think it will help a
oh
little bit with that. I would start with 1 teaspoon in a glass of water.
yes, I remember now. Yes.
Yeah, up that to a couple of times a day.
Mhm.
And if you don't like the taste of it, I took lemon juice and put it in a glass and put a little sweetener in it, keto safe sweetener, and some
Yeah.
water, and then added the teaspoon to that. And you barely taste, you taste a little bit, but not much, a full glass of water. So it's like a lemonade with a touch
Yeah.
of apple cider vinegar in it. It's not hard to drink. It's not hard to drink at all. So
No.
if you, some people can tolerate it. I get to where now I just put like quarter cup of water in a glass and put the vinegar in there and just shove it down and then have a chaser of water.
Yeah,
But
I can tolerate it.
good.
I have
So
the
I would do
stomach
that
for it.
try doing that um, for a couple days and see if you're having, as always, go by how your body feels and see how that's working with you. And then if your body's accepting it really well, then that'll also help with kidney stones and gallbladder, or is it gallbladder, not gallbladder, kidney stones and the stones because it helps dissolve them.
Yeah. I
And
I
anyway,
I I I heard that it helps to dissolve the stones that may be in your what do they call them?
bladder.
Yeah, in your the urine
Okay,
bladder.
you understand why? Because you take apple cider vinegar dissolves minerals. It will break them up. They're still there. It's not going to destroy them, but it dissolves them so that they become particulates instead of chunks. And that's
Yeah.
part of your problem in your tubes. I go by Dr. Wallach. He knows what he's talking about. And he said almost always kidney problems are from blocked tubes. So the apple cider vinegar also will help unblock those tubes. And it may be quick for you. It may take a while, but along with the protocol you're doing with the tangy tangerine and all that, he said give it 3 months. So it's not something that happens overnight, obviously. So you got to be
Yeah.
careful thinking that this isn't working. Make sure you give it 3 months, like he said, because he
Oh
knows what
yeah.
he's doing. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that that's going to help you immensely because it sounds like the stage 4 that's a scary word. They like to use that. Uh, just just trust what God's given you to help rebuild things and see how that goes. So
Do
because
you,
if you get into a critical point, they will do something for you. But I think you're going to be finding a little bit of improvement as time goes by.
oh yes, I believe it will. I wanted to ask you um the when the vinegar breaks up the what did you call them, the stones?
Well,
Do
and the
do
tube, yeah, stuff in the tubes.
do,
Yeah.
do I've heard of kidney stones before,
Yep.
and I know that they can break them up. It can break them up there, and but Dr. Wallach was talking about how the vessels that go to your kidneys can be blocked too.
But
Do,
yes, anything that carries moisture in your body. So you've probably got a very alkaline. You get
yeah,
you get tartar on your teeth.
I'm sorry.
You get tooth tartar.
Yes, I brush my teeth. I can tell
But
when there's some form of buildup.
okay, that is the same thing that's building up in your tubes and in your kidneys and all that stuff. It's the same stuff.
Oh,
I talked to a dentist one time. I said, you know what I've noticed? I've noticed you either get cavities or you get tartar. I said the tartar is the misplaced minerals that are supposed to go into your teeth.
yeah,
So when you get tartar, it's not going where it's supposed to. That K2 helps with that. K2 helps big time with that stuff. Make sure you take your K2.
yeah,
Make sure you
yeah.
take it religiously because that helps put you'll start getting osteoporosis, and receding gums
Mm,
are just osteoporosis. Your bones are shrinking. But that
okay.
stuff will help. And like I said, it doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. And you just have to be patient. There was a lady I knew whose husband told me at work that she had to go in to get, what was it, kidney? I think, oh, kidney stone. Had to go in for surgery for that. They're getting
Oh.
really bad. She was quite young, actually, probably in her 30s at the time. And he said that she went to the doctors. They were going to do surgery. She was scheduled for like a couple of weeks out, and because apparently they were quite bad. And she went to an osteopath, or not, no, I'm sorry, a naturopath. And the naturopath told her, he said, drink 2 gallons of apple cider in 1 week, and you will dissolve those stones. And apple cider, so it has to be unpasteurized. It's just fresh pressed apple juice with no pasteurization. And she did that. He said, if you do that, you won't have to have surgery. And in was it 3 days, 4 days? I can't remember what the time limit, but within that week, her stones were gone and she didn't need surgery. So apple cider is just more acidic. You've got an alkaline body instead of an acidic body.
Yeah.
I've got an alkaline body too. I started getting tartar and I'd never had it before. And that's when I realized I was too alkaline. But so anyway, you do the apple cider helps move things along, and your body will just either use it. If you take in the K2, it should utilize the minerals, or it will flush it out if there are too many. And that's my understanding of everything.
The last time they did a kidney scan to look for what was that word? Things. I'll just use a cheap word. Things. They found that on one of the kidneys, it was showing that there was this small, like a stone type of round thing, and they said, "Oh, well, you know how the VA, they always minimize main results, and they'll either tell you, oh no, there's nothing to worry about, or whenever it's very evident, they'll tell you, oh well, it's there, but here's some pills."
Yep, of course. Remember that the VA, this is something a lot of people don't know about the VA. Each building, each VA only needs 1 doctor, and they can literally give brand new hires that are off the street that know nothing about medicine title of doctor, and they can go in and literally practice medicine. This is my understanding of this. I learned this a long time ago, that they can actually be labeled a medical professional and be in there doing things with you. I mean, I could walk in and get hired by them and do that, apparently. This is my understanding of this, and that the doctors there are some of the ones that can't make it anywhere else. So you have to be very careful with them. They might be fresh out of school, that you don't know who you're getting when you go to a VA, and hopefully Trump will change that.
And I've noticed that, they showed me the chart and they said, do you see the little spot here, this little speck? That's a sign of some kind of stone or something, but it's not big enough to like really worry about. And they said, but we'll keep an eye on it. And then
if it wasn't there before, then that tells me that it's growing. It's something that's just big enough now that they can see it. And yes, you should worry about that. Oh, here, take this medicine. No, figure out how to get rid of them. Not everybody gets stones, and there's a reason for that. But I would say if you take the apple cider vinegar, I don't like the thought of you taking the apple cider because it's so high in sugar. It'd probably pop you right off the charts for your blood sugar. But the apple cider will work, I believe, over time as well. But it's for something to try if you're into that. It's a food, so it's not like you're taking medicine. I'm not prescribing medicine, but it's something that I know that people have used and it's worked. And if it doesn't, then take a week to drink 2 gallons of apple cider and just expect you're gonna love it. You'll probably chow most of it down in a couple days. But that I would put that off as the last resort because of your diabetes. Although your diabetes should be getting a little bit better. How are your numbers?
I've also noticed that whenever I go for like an MRI or something, their machines are never really set to like high resolution. They're always like in this cheap setting, so that when I've been to like an MRI place outside of the VA, and other people have donated money to help me get those MRIs, and there have always been like these high resolution scans that um tell you. I mean, they just tell you all the details about your spine, how crooked it is, how the discs are breaking up, or how there's like uh just different things happening with the discs. And they make the comparisons. You make the comparisons with the VA results with their machines, and they don't even compare. It's like night
Wow.
and day.
Yeah, and you're paying for that. Remember that the longevity products help rebuild discs
Yeah.
and all that stuff. It takes a little while, but you
Wow.
should start getting, yeah, they don't want you knowing that. They want to cut you open because it makes money. And you can talk health talk on YouTube. You just can't prescribe medicine. You
Yeah.
can't diagnose whatever, but that's why I'm saying this is all opinion on my part and stuff that I've seen on YouTube from doctors. So, and other places. But Dr. Wallach is the best on this, and he's it's hard to find on YouTube anymore because people are I think YouTube algorithms are trying to shut him up. They work with the big pharma. They want you taking drugs because puts money in their pocket. They want you getting cut up because it puts money in their pocket. And every surgery that you get has side effects, just like the medicine does.
Yeah. I'm
But
tired of feeling
anyway,
like
yeah.
a dissected frog, I
Yes,
mean,
and that's a lot of what's happened to you is probably part of your problem, what they've
yeah.
done to you.
Uh,
Anyway, you try the apple cider for a few weeks, see how that does. Don't forget it. Just put it next to if you drink coffee in the morning, whatever you do first thing when you get up, just put it there so you remember to use it, and try
yeah.
that for a few weeks and see how you do. I actually just do a lump of longevity. It should help quite a bit. It'll help your digestion too. You probably have really bad digestion, I'm guessing. Having a hard time with the assimilating things. So the apple cider vinegar helps keep your stomach acid up.
Yeah.
Good stuff. It's really good for you.
I didn't mean to hold you up for like 30 minutes. I just realized it's 11:30 or past it, and I'm blah 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 blah.
Well, it's
And
stuff people need to hear, and that's a good
oh,
thing. So I don't worry about it. So God
okay,
knows what he's doing. The timing is just right. So
I'm sorry.
all right. I'm glad you did that because I know other people need to hear. Remember, it's not just us here in Zoom. It's also people who might be listening to this maybe a week or a month from now that it's like, oh my gosh. And look up Dr. Joel Wallach. Anytime you have a question, look up Dr. Joel Wallach and your health issue and put it into YouTube. Do not watch anything else that will try to counter anything he says. He
Yeah.
is an amazingly well-read man. He's a veterinarian and a physician, and he knows his stuff. He's learned a lot of it from doing autopsies on animals and people. He's the one that he's cured a lot of diseases.
Yes.
He's cured a lot of diseases because of his research. They put, I think, selenium in baby formula now because it's something that they'd left out and it was causing problems. So once they put it in, it cured a bunch of ailments that kids had.
Selenium. Yes.
He's an amazing guy. I can't think. Maybe one thing I disagreed with him on one thing. I might even have been about that. So anyway, let's move along here, and we can talk about this afterwards if you like, or
Mhm.
think of some more questions you have after we get done with uh, the prayer and the Bible study, and then Missler will be open. And I want to put on the inauguration. I'll
Mhm.
shut down YouTube, and then we'll put on the inauguration. We can watch that. So,
That'd be
anyway,
great.
thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
I hope I help. See, who would like to pray?
I'll say a quick one just for the group and the prayer and to get going.
Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you just for all the blessings you always bestow upon us, especially having Jesus die for our sins and giving us the best gift of all, eternal life, and to be with you. And as we go about this study, please open our eyes to what it is you want us to know, make it clear. And then, of course, please fill us with the Spirit so that we can be bold and in sharing the gospel and bringing others and or hope to influence others to want to get to know you. And we thank you for this time and all the people, and you know everybody's needs and wants and whatever they need, Lord. And we just ask that you show favor on those needs and wants. And we just ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Beautiful prayer. Thank you. I have muted because the bird started screaming. So I'm talking. Thank you. That was a beautiful prayer. Is that out? And today is January 19th, not 18th. No reruns. Remember also when you pray to thank God for hearing and for answering, because you've answered him with faith that he will, and he will. Might be not what you prayed for. He'll answer your prayer. But just remember to thank him for good and bad. Thank him for hearing your prayer and answering your prayer. Okay. Oh, Job. Where did Job now? Awesome. January 19th, 2025, Job 1 through 421. This is a good one for people who are suffering. It's a long book, but I'll tell you what, poor Job. I think about him when I'm going through a hard time.
I have to agree. After you know Job's story, we really can't complain about anything.
Oh, that poor guy. Wow. Yeah. I'd like to do off the first bit. That was 1 through 4. So we've got 4 different verses or 4 different chapters. There's enough for 4 different people if you want to grab onto it.
So is it chapter 1 verses 1 through 4, or
No, it's chapter 1 and then chapters 1 through 4. So there's 4 different chapters. So if there's 4 people that want to read, they can each take a chapter if they like.
oh, how many verses are there in the first? I forgot.
In the first one, I know
Oh,
there's
it's a
okay,
long
22.
book.
22 is a very long book.
Oh,
Suffered a long
22
time.
is not bad.
22 in this one, this chapter.
Anybody wants to be first, or
They're a bashful bunch, I'll tell you.
hmm?
Very bashful. If you want to grab that, go ahead.
Oh, okay, if it's okay with everybody, I don't want to seem like a chat hog or anything like that.
You're good. Half the time they're all fighting who doesn't have to read it.
Okay, thank you for enlarging the letters too. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep and 1,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for the 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sacrificed them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that fears God and eschews evil? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for naught? Has not thou made an an edge about him and about his house and about all that he has on every side, that thou blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he has is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking while in their elders' brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only are escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The fire of God is fallen from heaven and has burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there also came another and said, The Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While you were yet speaking, there also came another and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. And said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job said not, nor charged God foolishly. Is that it? Oh, yeah. In all this, Job said not, nor charged God foolishly. Does anybody else want to read?
I can do chapter 2.
Okay. Yeah, it just rests my eyes. And
Yeah.
thank you.
Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and forth in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Jacob, that there is, thy servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. And still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, aye, all that a man hath he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thy integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto him, Thou said unto her, I'm sorry, it's not Steve. Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that came upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept. They rent every one his mantle and sprinkled dust upon their heads towards heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word with him, for they saw that his grief was very great.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Both great job reading, you guys. If you ever have to read, if you're not keeping up with what I'm doing, because sometimes I get off on this thing. If you have a King James Bible, you can always just read the passage out of that if it's easier for you. It's up to you guys how you want to do it.
Okay, since everybody's screaming about reading, I will read 3.
Thank you.
You're welcome. After this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day, and Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, There is a man child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not good regard it from above, neither light or neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the numbers of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day. Let it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from my eyes. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet, I should have slept. Then I had been at rest. The kings and counselors of the earth, which would desolate places for themselves, or the prices that had gold, who filled their houses with silver, or as a hidden ultimate untimely birth. I had not been as infants which never saw light. There the wicked cease from troubling, and the weary be at rest. There the prisoners rest together, they hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. Wherefore is light given unto him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul. Oh, okay. Which long for death, but it cometh not, and dig for it more than for hid treasures, which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured. Do you guys hear that echo?
I found it. Go ahead. It should be taken care of.
Okay. For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the waters. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me. That which I was afraid of is come unto me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came.
Interesting. Thank you. Interesting commentary by Job. He feared that happening. That happened. Okay, who would like to read 4? Thank you. That was a great job. Great job. 4 is 21 verses. They're all about the same. You can do it.
I'll read it.
Anybody?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Job 4. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, If we essay to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. But now it is come upon thee, and thou faintest, it toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. It is not thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and thy uprightness of thy ways. Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished, being innocent, or were the righteous cut off, even as I have seen that plow in equity and sow wickedness reap the same. By the blast of God they perished, and by the breath of his nostrils are consumed. The roaring of the lion and the voice of the fierce lion and the teeth of the young lions are broken. The old lion perished for lack of prey, and the stout lion's whelps are scattered abroad. Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and my ear receiveth a little thereof. And the thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth on men. Fear came upon me, trembling, which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face, the hair of flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before my eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying, Shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his Maker? Behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charged with folly. How much less in them that dwell in the houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, which are crushed before the moth. They are destroyed from the morning to evening. They perish forever without any regarding it. Thus there its excellency which is in them go away. They die even without wisdom.
Beautiful job, everyone. Thank you. Great job there. I have a question. We can continue with the book of Genesis. We're in session 16 of 24, or we can start with Job. It's up to you guys what you want to do. He's kind of out of the scientific stuff with Genesis. And if we need to, we can go back if somebody remembers 16 of 24, but it's up to you guys. If you want to start with Job today. because I can pull it up. Yes, thank you all. Oh, thank you, Michelle. Yes, thank you all for being here. So is it Job or Genesis? Up to you. I kind of like to start with Job, start fresh. While it's a long book, I don't know how much, because some of it is a lot of commentary by his friends, his three friends. That way we're contemporary with what's going on. Excuse me. Okay, there's 8 videos apparently. Tomorrow, so yeah, today would be chapter 1. Chapter 2 would be, yeah, see, we'll be even a little bit behind with that. So, okay, let's do. Amen, reality, same to you. Thank you. So that's what we'll do. We'll do Job. And I think if we want to, we'll go back and catch up with the other one as time goes on. But it looks like we might even be behind with Job. Let me put the. Ooh, I keep wanting this to move. You know, I've noticed that when I go outside too. We've got chapter 2 and 5 tomorrow. Or I think we'll be able to catch up with. That'll be good. We'll do Job. So for all you who want to peel out of here, I'll put a link in the chat. I've been muting because the birds are getting very noisy. I had one bird nights ago that I don't know what happened to her, but her eye looks like they pecked her eye out or something. Her eye's all messed up. So I think they're all excited about that. Okay, so there's the link, and there's Job.
A new book tonight, the oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job. An incredible book, widely misunderstood. Victor Hugo, the famous author, called it the greatest masterpiece of the human mind. That's quite a statement by a very professional guy. Its style is very unique. It's actually an epic poem. It's probably comparable in a sense, like the Iliad or the Odyssey, what have you. Its style is such that it may have been originally, long, long ago, presented as a drama, because most of it is in poetry, framed by some prose. The prose is almost like program notes. You know, if you go to an opera or something like that, you often have notes that come up in front or sometimes behind it to explain it. It's very similar to that. But despite its very elevated and elaborate style, it's all about a real person. Job was not just a figure of literature of some kind. He is a very real person. He's mentioned by Ezekiel along in the same phrase, if you will, with Noah and Daniel. So just as Noah was real and Daniel, of course, was real, so is Job. He's also mentioned by James in the New Testament. In fact, we'll make reference to that here shortly. The vocabulary, there's much discussion among experts about the translation, because it's a very, very elegantly written piece, although very, very early. It's as I say, the earliest book in the Bible. There's over 110 words that are not found anywhere else in the Old Testament. That's a larger number of what they call the hapax legomena, the words that are not used anywhere else. It's the largest number than any other Old Testament book. The vocabulary is very elegant. For example, there's 5 different words for lions. There's 6 different words for traps, 6 different words for darkness, and so forth. We'll find in it all kinds of things, names of constellations. In fact, we'll discover some things about the constellations that you probably don't know, even if you were an astronomer. We'll come to that when we get there. It has names of metals, precious stones. He clearly was familiar with the anatomy of these giant beasts. It includes the technical language of law courts, technical language from the occupations of mining and hunting, has references to insects, reptiles, birds, beasts, weapons, military strategies, musical instruments, means of travel. geography, whirlwinds, dew, dawn, darkness, clouds, rain, all these things are quite rich in their expression. It also has a surprising richness of both similes and metaphors. As an example, the brevity of life is depicted by a weaver's shuttle one place, one's breath in another place, a cloud, a shadow, a runner, a falcon, or flower. The language is very, very elegant, very sophisticated. And we'll discover that Job was probably one of the richest, most powerful men of his time. Now, along with this poetic parallelism, which you'll find all through it, that's where you have two lines where the second line completes or contrasts with the first, very typical pattern in Hebrew poetry. It also has strophes, which are groups of verses that have a rhythmic pattern all through the thing. So much so that Tennyson, the famous poet, called this the greatest poem of both ancient and modern times. Now, we'll miss all that because we're obviously going to confine our concerns with just the translation. But for those that are expert in the language, it's a very, very elegant, uniquely structured document. We speak of the names of God, but in the book of Job, we will find Elohim, El, Eloah, Adonai, Jehovah, or Yahweh, however you wish, and Shaddai. Elohim is God the creator, in other words, carrying out God's will. El, the name of God, is God the omnipotent, carrying out his work. Aloha is God that's worshipped, the living God, that's in contrast to idols and such. There's the word Adonai, which is God the ruler and of the earth. In fact, the whole earth, not just his chosen people. And Jehovah, or Yehovah, or however you choose to pronounce it, God the eternal one, he who is, who was, and always will be, or is to come. The self-existent God who stands in a covenant relationship with his own people. And then Shaddai, which actually means breath, but means God the all-bountiful. Some people say God the Almighty, but it's really not merely almighty as regards power, but all-bountiful as regards his resources. In fact, the term actually, as I say, is the Hebrew, related to the Hebrew word for breast. The languages are mostly Hebrew, but also Akkadian, Arabic, Aramaic, Sumerian, Ugaritic, and there's it's an amalgam of many ancient languages, which makes the translations a special challenge. But if you get into that, and I'll just use one example that I think is fascinating, you find Hebrew idioms. The trick in this is to translate Hebrew idioms into our idioms, not literally. Sometimes a literal translation causes you to miss it unless you know the idioms. Idioms are the key thing. One of the Hebrew idioms is a verb for accept. It's the word dashan, which technically means turn to ashes. To accept a sacrifice, God turned it to ashes. And it gives us a clue as to how Abel knew that remember in the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis 4, that Abel knew that his offering was accepted. How? Scholars believe, because there are several references to this, that in those days God actually accepted it with fire from heaven. That's how Cain knew his wasn't, and that's why they had the animosity and so forth. In fact, we even find that this having respect to Abel's offering is how he obtained a witness that he was righteous, as the book of Hebrews, the New Testament, confirms. We do have a book here that's by a single author. It's not an amalgam by editors. It's a single author from the interdependence of the design. And then the big speculation comes, when was this book written? We're not sure. There's a tremendous range of guesses by scholars. There's a lot of evidence to indicate that the book was during the time of the patriarchs, maybe as old as Abraham himself. There's no mention of the law or Israel and so forth, yet there are sacrifices. That's interesting. The idea of sacrifices preceded the law of Moses and so on. There's no mention of other gods. It's interesting. This ancient book takes for granted one God. There isn't an issue of false gods and so forth. Now, there's a lot of clues as to when it was. One is the length of Job's life. He was probably about 60 when all these things started to happen because his children are grown, and yet he lives 140 years after the events of this book. And so that would imply he's got several hundred years, which is compares very favorably with Abraham's father Terah, who lived to be at 205. As you look at those patriarchs, their longevities get shorter. Terah was 205, Abram was 175, Isaac 180, Jacob 147, Joseph 110. They got shorter since. So that age implies, in the absence of other evidence, that it precedes Abraham, maybe in Terah's father. Abraham's father. He may have overlapped Noah, which is 350 years before the flood, or Shem, 502 years. Abraham may have been born only 292 years after the flood. These things overlap. It's very interesting sometime when you study your Bibles, take those ages, and they're related, and to see how fascinating those long lives also cause some interesting overlaps. And it's gives a whole different perspective to look into that. We'll notice that in the book, wealth is measured by livestock and not by the number of Mercedes in the garage or something like that. So this is very typical of the idioms in the days of Abraham and Jacob and so forth. We hear about two tribes, the Sabians and the Chaldeans, are nomads in the time of Job. They were not in later years. So that's also another clue of its antiquity, very early. Job was priest of his family, so a national priesthood was not in existence yet. And there's a Hebrew word twice. It says a piece of money. That Hebrew idiom is only used twice, and both elsewhere in the Bible, only in the days of Jacob. And musical instruments, the timbrel, the harp, the lyre, the flute, are also mentioned in Genesis as early as Genesis 4, also in Genesis 31. Job's daughters were heirs to the estate, which means this was not after Moses. It was earlier. And there are also similar literary works they've discovered in Mesopotamia about the same time. There's no reference to any of the Mosaic institutions. There's no priesthood, laws, tabernacles, special religious days, any of that. So it obviously predates all of that. And the name Shaddai, which we typically translate God the Almighty, is used 31 times in the book of Job, 17 times elsewhere in the New Testament all put together. It's a very prominent name there. And now the other clue is the personal and place names that are associated with the book of Job are also associated with the age of the patriarchs, Abraham and so forth. And I could go through these and bore you to death, but basically Sheba is, which means oath, or sometimes also can mean 7. It was a kingdom in Arabia, among other things, and the Sabians from Sheba are mentioned in Genesis 25 and elsewhere many times in Job. Sheba, in fact, was in southern Arabia, and the Sabians of classical geography carried on trade with the spices with people all over the ancient world. They were Semites, speaking some particular dialects of South Arabia. And it later becomes a monarchy in the days of Queen of Sheba that visits Solomon and all of that. We'll hear a lot about Tema, which technically means south or desert. It's a place that is about 250 miles southeast of Edom, on the route between Damascus and Mecca, and in the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. We'll constantly find these place names and things all seem to associate with Arabia, especially northern Arabia, especially northeast Arabia, Edom and that area. So somehow that's the domain of all of this. One of the key players, one of the first of the 3 key so-called friends of Job, Eliphaz, he's one of the guys that visited Job in his affliction. He was a Temanite, that is a native of Teman in Idumea or Edom. He's the first that enters into a debate with Job. Much of the bulk of the book are these debates, and we won't go through all that in excessive detail, but that's the core of the book. Eliphaz's language is more delicate and gentle than his other buddies, but he still imputes to Job, tries to say all his problems are because of his sin, and so forth. And we could go on. Now, Job itself is a very common name in about 2000 BC in that region. So it's hard to pin anything else down. So much for that. The first part of the book that we're going to touch on tonight will be like an introduction, gives us an awareness of a conversation that Job didn't know about. As we study the book of Job, you need to realize the insight that we'll get right up front is one that Job didn't have. We're going to be treated to this dialogue between God and Satan, where the whole thing is sort of a contest is proposed. Job didn't know that. And as you study this, we need to, the book, let's try to keep that in mind. We have this strange sort of challenge. And by the way, it's God that challenges Satan, not the other way around. We'll highlight that in a minute. Then the bulk of the book is Job's three friends. During all these troubles, he has these three friends that, quote, comfort him, close quote. And as we often joke, if you have friends like that, you don't need enemies. Because they're all being his friends, but trying to explain that all his problems are because of his sin or this, that, and the other thing. And finally, at the end of things, God himself answers for Job and puts those guys where they belong. But there's a fourth guy that everybody overlooks. Very mysterious guy. We'll talk about that, Elihu. He's a fourth friend that also comments, God does not rebuke him. There's a great mystery as to what that's really all about, and we'll deal with that when we get there. But then at the end, when God answers for Job, is one of the most precious passages in the Bible. There's a science quiz given to Job and his friends by God himself. And tucked away in that science quiz are all kinds of discoveries. It's actually, there is more on the creation of the world in Job than in the book of Genesis. So those of us that have sort of a technical bent will discover in every nook and cranny all kinds of little interesting surprises. There are dinosaurs, both aquatic and land dinosaurs, in the book of Job. Because where are the dinosaurs in the Bible? They're there in the book of Job. And of course, Satan's challenge goes defeated because Job does pretty well. Now, where there is so much misinformation, and I won't ask you to write, if we were a class, I'd ask you to take a piece of paper and write down before we start what you think the main message in Job is. And I'd be willing to predict that more than 9 out of 10 will be wrong. Job is, why do the innocent suffer? That's the common cliche you see in commentaries or Bible handbooks. Job's all about, why do the innocent suffer? Well, if that's the problem, it never gets answered. That's not what Job is about, really. Job is about the oldest lesson in the world. Job is about the most important lesson that is possible for us to learn. And if we don't know this lesson, it doesn't matter what else we know. And our knowledge might be vast, maybe very deep on a number of subjects, but it will not carry us beyond the grave, and this lesson will. It's a lesson I can't teach you. How shall mortal man be justified before God? Even Socrates displays his brilliance by raising the question. Socrates in 500 BC said, it may be that deity can forgive sins, but I don't see how. That expression of frustration shows great insight on Socrates because he recognized that a holy God has a problem forgiving sin because sin needs to be paid for. So this lesson that we're going to be experiencing in Job is a lesson that only God himself can teach. In James, we have a reference to Job. James was the Lord's brother that wrote the book in the Bible. It's very late in the New Testament, the last couple of books before the end. James uses this strange expression, the end of the Lord. In other words, the final lesson, the final key, if you will, the end of the Lord. He says, behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord. The Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. So the patience of Job is only a piece of the puzzle. We're going to discover this guy, Job, endured some astonishing things and acquitted himself surprisingly well. But be careful what the point of it is. If you believe that the point of this is the patience of Job, you're setting yourself up for a failure because you're setting yourself up for just another reason to have confidence in the flesh or oneself, rather than to really gather the message that the book of Job really carries. And what is that message? You remember, it's the message that started in the Garden of Eden, where God asked the question of Adam and Eve, where art thou? And the answer, of course, in effect, it's implied, is lost. That's where we all are. And that's where Job was, even with his patience, even with his endurance and so forth. A couple of questions. What did the mighty famine have to do in Luke 15 to the son? What did it teach him? The prodigal son. There was a famine. He was in a far land. What did it teach him? It brought him to the point where he could say to himself and ultimately to his father, I have sinned. There's another famine for Joseph's brethren, you may recall, in Genesis 44, where ultimately they go to Egypt and they acknowledge before Pharaoh, we are verily guilty. What did Nathan's parable to David? Remember when Nathan went to David over Bathsheba and all that? What did that parable do for David? It caused David to confess, I have sinned against the Lord. When we get to the book of Isaiah, it starts right off in chapter 6 of Isaiah, where Isaiah sees sees the throne of God. And what's his response? I am, in chapter 6, verse 5 verses, I am undone, I am unclean. It's interesting, every place in the Bible where one is confronted with God, his response isn't joy, it's terror in terms of realizing the gap between ourselves and a holy God. You say, well, gee, I'm not so bad. Maybe not, but compared to a holy God, you got big problems. It's not so much how evil you are, that's bad enough. It's how holy God is. Daniel, the same thing. In Daniel 10, he gets confronted and he says, my comeliness is turned to corruption. He's crushed. Remember what the miracle did for Peter in the New Testament in Luke 5. Jesus did a miracle and Peter fell and said, depart from me, O Lord, I'm a sinful man. It confronted him with the reality of who he was. So if all we gather from this book is the patience of Job, which is the cliche, very common cliche, it'll only provide additional grounds for self-confidence and thus our own ultimate disappointment and depression, because we each will fail to even be as good as Job did. So that's not the point of the book. Why do the innocent suffer? That's the usual cliche, and I'm always amused because that issue won't really be answered, in a sense. You will not, when you finish Job, you won't really know why innocent suffer. In this case, they suffered because Satan had a challenge. If Job overheard that, he'd say, can't you challenge somebody else, please? You know. It reminds you of Tigvi in the famous musical Fiddler on the Roof. We praise to God. Couldn't you just for a while choose somebody else, you know? There's a deeper level, too, and we're going to understand the relationship between Satan and God, widely misunderstood. You'll notice as we get into this, they're not equals. This isn't dualism as underlies the concepts behind the Star Wars, you know, the dualism, that there's good force, there's dark side, good side, and that they're somehow in conflict. Nonsense. The good side is in control. And it's not dualism. They're not equal. Satan is subject to God all the way through. All the forces in this narrative are under God's control. There are no surprises to God. More than any other book in the Bible, we're going to be confronted with glimpses of the true greatness and majesty of God. So be prepared. It's going to be a fun trip. Let's just jump right into Job chapter 1. You thought I could prattle for a full hour as an introduction, but I'm going to surprise you. Job chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz, not Oz, Uz, whose name was Job. That man was perfect and upright and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Now, Uz, there's a number of Uzes in the scripture, son of Shem, son of Noah. There was a land of kings in Jeremiah's day, in Jeremiah 25. But also, Uz was also a neighbor of Edom. And some scholars believe that Uz was in the Bashan area, the Golan Heights area, south of Damascus. Others that it was Edom, southeast of the Dead Sea. Others, and I think this is the way I lean for a lot of reasons, they believe it was east of Edom in northern Arabia. Most of this, I believe, happened in northern Arabia. And this last view is supported by the fact that Job lived in the desert region, yet the land was fertile for livestock and agriculture. The customs, vocabulary, and the geography all relate to northern Arabia, so much so that to me is the scholastically most justifiable conjecture as to actual location. Job was apparently one of the most prominent citizens in whatever region that is. And that's really what we're getting to. It says he was perfect. The word is tam, which means upright, sincere, without guile. He was blameless, not sinless. I'm not saying he was sinless, but he was blameless and he knew how to deal with his sin. He knew how to handle his sin. He does sacrifices and so forth. But we do see portrayed for us a complete, well-balanced man that feared God. And that, in fact, if you don't yield to that point, if you don't really understand that Job was blameless, you'll miss the point of most of the discussion. as his friends try to probe and pin all his troubles on his shortcomings. Verse 2. We're making progress. Let's see. We made one verse in 20 minutes. We'll be all right. Okay. Verse 2. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was, get this, the greatest of all the men of the East. Very prosperous guy. It's interesting that riches are not necessarily evil. Here's a good guy, one of the best in the land. He also happened to be the richest in the land, and one of the richest. And so that's a key point here. In verse 3, we have a list of the camels, the oxen, and so forth. That list is going to turn out to be very important for us. By the time we get to the end of the book, that list is going to reveal to you a surprise. A surprise that will prove, I believe, to be of great comfort, a comfort that most people miss, that is probably one of the most important comforts that you may experience in your life. And I'll leave it there until we get to chapter 42 and get into all that, but be ready for that. This closes with the phrase, the men of the East. That term, he was usually associated with the tribe of Kedar in northern portions of Arabia. It's that area that you and I would know as Kuwait, incidentally. Not a big deal in passing. Verse 4, and his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for the 3 sisters to eat and to drink with him. Now his sons, he has 7 sons. What most scholars infer what they mean here, they feasted on their birthday. Each one of the sons had a special day, and they were having a feast, and each one had a unique time, and the 3 sisters went to eat and drink with them. We're going to discover fatherly concern. We're going to discover that Job was a family guy. Verse 5. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, and Job sent and sanctified them, he rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. He's a man. Here's a guy who is a man of prayer. Very rich, very wealthy, very prosperous, a neat guy. But one of the focuses that we have on him, he's a man of prayer. In fact, one of his concerns is that his children may have inadvertently cursed God in their hearts. And because of that, he offered special prayers for them. This idea of cursing God in your heart is going to emerge as one of the key themes in this book. And Job also, I think, recognized that your greatest spiritual challenge can be when things are going well. Often our greatest spiritual growth is when things are rough. It's interesting, it's when things are really tough that we turn to God. Maybe that's why he brings toughness into our life. It's the only time he hears from us. Why don't you call? One of our biggest challenges can be when things are well, when prosperous, and the market's up, and got this promotion, and everything's going great. Watch out. Watch out. That's when you can be tested in the greatest way possible. This speaks of a burnt offering. A burnt offering, from our study in Leviticus, you may recall that burnt offering was the one that spoke of total dedication to God. And in effect, the recognition of God's rightful ownership of men and women. So the burnt offering is mentioned here as a practice that he did. I think the burnt offering is not just is not a Mosaic offering. I believe, was the offering in Eden from the beginning. But we'll move on here. And so here's Job, a godly man, a landowner, and a good father. In fact, everything that you can sort of explore about Job, you'll discover he's got straight A's in his report card. He's a good guy. That's the point. That's the premise that underlies the whole book. And it's very important to understand that right up front. So as the first 5 verses sets us up. We know who he was, where he lived, what he had, he's wealthy. Everything is peachy keen. And then we get to verse 6, which opens up the dark side, in a sense. It says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Now here we have a very key technical term, a term that is used consistently throughout the Old Testament to refer to angels. The Bene Ha-Elohim, which means the sons of God. What that term implies is a direct creation of God. A direct creation of God. And therefore that term is used quite broadly of angels. We got a scene shift that occurred here in verse 6. We've shifted from the earth, with its camels and wealth and whatever, into heaven. This is a scene shift that probably is dramatized by Elisha's servant. You may recall in 2 Kings 6, when Elisha and the servant are surrounded by the Syrian army. And they're all out there. And the servant gets up in the morning and sees them, realizes they're surrounded. He's frightened. He's terrified. These are the enemy. He goes to Elisha and says, Elisha, we're surrounded. Elisha says, relax. Those that are with us are more than they were them. The servant says, in effect, wait, I can hear them revving their engines. They're there. They're real. And Elisha, almost out of exasperation, turns to the Lord and says, Lord, open his eyes so he can really see. And the servant looks out and he sees that they surrounded, they themselves were surrounded with chariots of fire. Elisha's servant was given this glimpse into this other dimensionality that Elisha, of course, understood, that they were well protected. We see a similar kind of glimpse into the spiritual reality in Daniel chapter 10, where Daniel is fasting and praying and for 21 days, and this messenger comes and explains that he'd been sent when he started fasting. 21 days ago he was sent, but it took him 21 days to fight his way through this demonic world, to get through, and the prince of the power of Persia was against him until Michael came to help him. And he's come through. When I give you the next two chapters of prophecy, chapters 11 and 12 of Daniel, I got to go back and fight him, and then also the prince of Greece shortly. Greece came after 200 years after Persia. But he's not talking about the kings, he's talking about the spirit powers behind those empires. And of course, in Revelation 4, we get another glimpse like that when John is caught up there. So we have this, we're moving into this strange reality. Nachmanides, the ancient Hebrew sage in the 12th century, in his commentary on Genesis, concluded from the text of Genesis 1 that the universe has 10 dimensions, but only 4 are knowable by ourselves, and 6 are not knowable. And that's very curious because today particle physicists, with their billion-dollar atomic accelerators, have determined that we live in 10 dimensions. Not the 3 that were spatial dimensions we're familiar with, length, width, height. There's a 4th called time. Those 4 dimensions we can measure. The other 6 we know are there by a number of ways, but we can't measure the curl in less than 10 to the minus 35 centimeters, so we can only infer them by indirect means. I find that fascinating because they've discovered, finally, today, what Nachmanides learned by studying the text carefully. But it's interesting, too, because I suspect, this is just a conjecture, but I throw it out for your consideration. I think the original universe prior to Genesis 3 was a 10-dimensional universe, and the result of Adam's sin was to split. That the 4 that we're left with are the 4 that we experience. The other 6 are hidden from us. And we call those the spiritual realm. I think much of these things are hyperdimensional, more so than the dimensions. That's all a possibility. We could spend a lot of time on that. But the main point is, the direct creations of God are angels and also Adam. Luke, in his genealogy, when he gets to Adam, says Adam was a son of God. Adam was a direct creation of God. You and I are not direct creations of God. We're sons of Adam, not sons of God in the natural. How do we come? Direct creations of God. In John, the Holy Spirit designed this whole book, 66 books by 40 different guys over thousands of years, but it's one book with its origin outside our spaces, our hyperspaces. In John chapter 1, speaking of Jesus, it says, he came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become what? The sons of God. You see, you and I are the subject of a new creation when that happens. We don't see anything, we don't feel anything necessarily. There may be some change. There better be some changes in your life. There should be some evidence of it. But still, the point is the new birth, as we call it, being born again, is an idiom that we use for what? That new creation. You are a new creature in Christ. You are then a son of God, a direct creation of God. No longer a son of Adam, son of God. And those idioms are not just figures of speech. They reveal a very, very profound dynamic in our situation. So this whole idea of the Benai Ha Elohim becomes very important when you get to Genesis chapter 6, because it's the reason for the flood of Noah. Why did the flood come? Because some of these angels, fallen angels, attempted to create hybrids called the Nephilim, the fallen ones. And they're embodied in all the ancient myths of all the ancient cultures. And because of the contamination of the human genome, we have, you can call that a form of genetic engineering if you like. God had a problem. Because that's why Satan did it, to try to contaminate the human race to prevent the Messiah, the Redeemer, being born. And that's why God sent the flood. And if you study Genesis 6, there's plenty of materials on that. That was the ancient understanding of the ancient rabbis. It's also the understanding of the early church. Some other theories came up in the 5th century. They're commonly taught in seminaries today that have only one problem with it. They have no scriptural support. The lines of Seth issue and all that. I won't get into all that here. That's all bodied in that phrase, Son of God. And our confidence in our understanding of it come largely from the book of Job, some of the way these words are used. Now, there's another thing to understand from verse 6, and that is that Satan has access to heaven. God's got a meeting going on here, and all the angels come, including Satan. Satan's an angel. He was appointed originally in charge of them all. He was the anointed cherub that covered. He's a cherubim, which is a super kind of angel. And he was the one that was in charge of all the rest. We understand from Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, among other places. So he has access to heaven. The day will come, from Scripture, when he's kicked out. He isn't kicked out yet. He has access. What does he do up there? Accuses us. He's up there as a tattletale. Boy, did you see what he just did? Now, you don't have to worry about that if in Christ, because we also have a defense counsel who happens to be the son of the boss. And what does he do? What's Jesus doing today? He's up there every day interceding in prayer for you and I. Now, that's a prayer partner to have. But Satan's there. He's the accuser. That's what the word really means, our adversary, our accuser. That's what the term means. That's his role. That's his nasty, vicious mission. He has both access to heaven and he has a mission that's adverse to you and I, a mission of accusation. And when you find someone that makes his living accusing the brethren, you know where that doctrine comes from. Be careful. Let's go to verse 7. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? And where have you been? Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Kind of interesting. The Lord says, Satan, where have you been? I've been down on the earth. I always wonder when I hear that. Is there other places you could have been to? Are there other planets you could be wandering around? I don't know. I'm not suggesting he does. It's interesting. Where have you been? Well, I was in the earth, wandering around, looking, checking things out. Walking up and down in it. Satan is doing that right now. Peter, in his first letter, chapter 5, verse 8, warns us, be sober and be vigilant, because, why? Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. He's out to get you. Chuck, you're making a boogeyman speech. Yes, I am. Sounds like you're scared of him. But for Christ, I would be. But for Christ, I don't have to be, is what I'm trying to get across. I muffed that line a little bit. I think you know what I'm trying to say. Ephesians chapter 4, Paul tells us, be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath, neither give place to the devil. Interesting. You're upset with your wife, or your wife's upset with you. Don't let the sun go down on that wrath. Why? Because it gives Satan an opportunity. I'm indebted to my wife. Because often I'm very moody and you don't see that side of me. I'd give you my best face, but she tells you the real truth about it. Read her book, she'll tell you. I can be awful. But she doesn't let us go to bed with a chip on her shoulder about whatever, some stupid thing that's got me off sick. She virtually forces us to say, wait a minute, let's straighten this up before, let's not let the sun go down on our wrath, if you want to call it that. For lots of reasons, not the least of which is we don't want to give place to the devil. That's where Satan has a field day. Anytime husband and wife are at odds, Satan's got an opportunity. And he'll take care of it, take advantage of it. Praise God for the incredible woman God has given me that really understands that. In fact, in Ephesians 6, we have an elaboration of this where Paul tells you, be strong in the Lord, put on the armor of God. Why? For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and so forth. Those are ranks of angels in the Greek, those terms. We wrestle against rulers of darkness, and he's not talking about our political structure. He's talking about the hosts of Satan. You remember when Lord said he said to Peter that Satan has desired to sift you as wheat, but I prayed not that you wouldn't fail, or not that you wouldn't fall, but that your faith fail not. He didn't pray that Peter wouldn't fall. He prayed that his faith fail not. Interesting. Interesting to study that. Anyway, let's move on. Verse 8. The Lord said unto Satan, see, he's called all things together. Satan said, hey, where you been, Satan? I've been running around checking out things on the earth. The Lord says, the Lord challenges Satan. Notice the challenge does not come from Satan. The challenge comes from the Lord. He challenges Satan. Have you checked out my servant Job? You almost can see the Lord's thumb under his suspenders here. You know, have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Listen, God here is endorsing Job. You want to join Job's three friends and say, well, he must have been sinning, or he did this, or he did that. Hey, God gives you his report card in verse 8. There's none like him on the earth. Certainly not Chuck Missler. Because Job is a perfect, upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. None like him in the earth. Job's report card is the key to the rest of the book. If you don't really understand that, you'll miss most of what goes on. You'll lose the whole point of the righteousness if the righteousness of Job is any way tarnished, if it is any way blemished. The whole point of this book will lose its impact. See, don't we reap what we sow? Where justice ends, love begins. That's part of what this book is all about, as you'll see before it's all over. And Job's friends are all wrong on this point. In the discourses that occur with his three friends, these extensive, each one is going to have about 3 cracks at Job, and there's 3 friends, there's quite a few discourses. Each one is wrong. It sounds great, some tremendous arguments, they're all wrong, because they are wrong about this point. See, what makes this collision of viewpoints that make up these the coming discourses so dramatic is the soundness of their arguments. They're cogent, but they're wrong. If they were frail arguments, they'd fall apart. This wouldn't be a piece of literature. Their arguments are sound. They're real, except they're wrong. You can have very persuasive arguments that stand the test of scholarship that are still wrong. They're wrong, contrary to the Word of God. But notice right up here, as you get going here, it's God that's challenging Satan, not the other way around. Verse 9. And then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? In other words, yeah, no wonder he's right, because you just spoiled him. He's rich, and he's got all this neat stuff. Take all it away from him. You know, that's sort of the flavor. Now Satan's going to, set up a test here, in effect. See, Satan's premise is that Job is only after his own self-interest. He worships God for his own welfare. By the way, I don't see anything wrong with that. I worship God because I'm better off doing that. I know that I am, I admit it. But see, Satan's premise is that Job's doing it only for his self-interest. And this is the ultimate question for each one of us. See, we see Satan's cynical premise underlying all this. Is worship a coin that buys you spend only for a heavenly reward? Is piety to God a contract? I do it because it's going to, Will Job serve God if he gets nothing in return? That's sort of the implied question here. We're talking about real worship instead of just thanksgiving. Now, the attack here that Satan is attacking will attack the integrity of God. And because Satan is accusing God of rigging the rules. Rigging the rules. You know, it's astonishing to realize how many fundamental theological premises prevalent today attack the character of God. I'll give you two. I think with two I can offend everybody. So they're probably, it only takes a couple to get just about everybody here. First one is amillennialism. Most denominations, Catholic and Protestant both, are amillennial in their eschatology. Well, yes, the Lord's coming back, but he rules in our hearts. I mean, a real millennium of 1,000 years. Come on, get serious. They disparage the idea of a real millennium. That's what they're called amillennium. There isn't really a millennium. That's just symbolic language. It sounds good until you realize that it's making God a liar. Because all through the Old Testament, beyond little check verses, all through the Old Testament, God hammers away. 1,845 times talks about the second coming of Jesus Christ coming to rule on the earth. The babe at Bethlehem is going to take the throne of David. He never has yet. The throne of David is an earthly political throne. That's what it means. He's not on David's throne now. He's on his father's throne. He's out of place. He's going to take David's throne. Amillennialism. It's not just a different viewpoint of prophecy. It's a fundamental concept of what the Bible's all about. God means what he says and says what he means. And throughout the Old and New Testament, he talks about this. To deny it is a way of attacking the character of God. Let me get even more offensive to some of you. Calvinism is another one. Dave Hunt, who I respect, very controversial, but I respect very highly, has got a new book coming out. I've got a manuscript. He's asked me to endorse it, which I have. My endorsement will be on the cover. His title of the book is What Love Is This? Subtitle, Calvinism's Misrepresentation of the Character of God. Ooh, that's a debate that's going on for a lot of time. So what's new here? So you don't have just two choices, Calvinism or Arminianism. Those are just two. That's the way it's been couched. No, there's much more to it than that. And David will attack that. We won't hear. But the point is, be careful. Be careful not to attack the integrity. God means what he says and says what he means. And when you stay there, you're protected. You start wandering around in some of these viewpoints, you can get in trouble fast. I love, just this weekend, I had a guy drive 6 hours from Colorado Springs to come and spend a few hours on Saturday. We had a wonderful time. I won't get into more of the details, except he highlights something that Rademacher said. We both know him. He's a neat guy, neat theologian. He says, we were talking about what biblical theology is. Hopefully that's what you and I are doing, is biblical theology. What is biblical theology? That's the theology that lines between the exegesis, what the text really says, and systematic theology. In other words, it's the real. It's so often we systematize it, and then we impose that system on whatever we find. Now, set that aside. Let's just follow what the text says, and it'll keep us out of trouble. Well, anyway, God is going to use Job to silence Satan. And as he does this, he's also going to deepen Job's own spiritual insight, and as he does so, he'll deepen yours and mine. And Job will be blessed doubly for enduring all of this. Any of you who have worked in a forge and so forth know that metal has no strength until it's tempered. And that's exactly what's going on here. Verse 10. Satan continues, hast thou not made a hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. This is an interesting verse. There's a very fundamental theology that we can learn here, and that is that Satan can't touch you unless God permits it. Satan's complaining. No wonder Job's, haven't you put a hedge about him? You protected him. You won't let me in that fence. He's sealed off. Can't get my hands on him. On every side. You've blessed the work of his hands. All his portfolio is up in the market. All his ventures are prospering. No wonder he loves you. You see the implied threat there. That Job loves God because it's profitable for him. But the key insight here is that nothing can happen to any of us Unless God permits it. Everything, if you're a Christian, everything that happens in your life is Father filtered. It's Father filtered. So when you have a trial in your life, one of your prayers should be, Lord, that the lesson not be wasted. Because you don't want to go through it again once it's set up. Verse 11, Satan continues, put forth thy hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. That's Satan's challenge. You've just spoiled the young man. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has. His possessions is in focus here. He's going to touch other things later with his possessions. And he will what? Curse thee to thy face. The very thing that Job was giving offerings for fear that his sons might do. The idea of cursing God. We don't think of cursing God because that's so overt. But there's probably 1,000 ways we find to curse God subtly. If nothing else, by omission. By oversight, whatever. Anyway, let's get on here. Verse 12. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon thy himself put not forth thine hand. In other words, God says, okay, I'll change the rules. You can touch what he has. It says, behold, all that he hath, in other words, his possessions, is in your power. Only upon himself. In other words, you can touch his belongings, his things, everything except his person. You can't touch that. I want you to notice something. God's restrictions are never challenged. Satan is bound. He's subservient to. You know, there's a guy by the name of Koch wrote a book many years ago called Between Christ and Satan. It was a well-intended book, but the title is tragic because it implies they're equal. Between Christ, as if there's a contest between Christ and Satan. No, Christ created Satan. He's the creator. No contest in the traditional sense. Only upon himself put not forth thy hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. You notice Satan didn't waste any time. He is gone like a shot. I visualize the Roadrunner cartoon. You know, he's on his way. He got his authority. He's on his way. Satan's a rebel, but he's one constrained by the rules. And there's no even suggestion that he attempts to break those rules. Those are not the issue. God is totally in control, even this, from cover to cover in this book, in the book of Job, but also in the whole Bible. God is in control. Let me give you another example that many people overlook. The Pharisees determined to take Christ, but not on a feast day. And the Romans would have a fit because they're worried about insurrection. We're going to take him, but not on a feast day. Check the text. And one night, at dinner, Jesus announces that he's going to be betrayed. That shook Judas. He wasn't ready. That wasn't the night. This was Passover. Not only is it a feast, it's the high feast of the year. You got to be kidding. But the cat's out of the bag. Someone here is going to betray me. And all the disciples said, I am. And Satan panicked. Christ says, what you do quickly. He splits. He's got to get it together. If he doesn't do it tonight, it's over because the word's out. You got a fisher, gut bait guy, so he runs to make the arrangements. Notice who's in charge. It isn't Judas, it's Christ. He's calling the timing. You get to Gethsemane. They're there with they show up with the arms and so forth. He says, who's seeking? Jesus of Nazareth, I am he. They fall down, they're so shocked. I said, who are you asking for? Jesus, I told you I'm he. Well, if me you seek, let these go their way. Look who's giving the orders. To the troops. Jesus is. He controls every detail. No, God is in control. In this book, from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22, he's in control. Make no mistake about it. Don't ever lose sight of that. Verse 13. And there was a day, now we're back on the earth. Now you notice, by the way, just remember this as we go through, Job didn't have the benefit of this conversation. The phone wasn't tapped. He didn't overhear this conversation, this deal going on here. He's living his life. And there was a day, verse 13, when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house. There came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabians fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Satan doesn't waste any time. Having dinner and to get message that his whole deal is wiped out by brigands, in effect. The Sabians were a region from southwest Arabia, and so on. But that, you get the role here, of course, is for the adversary. Verse 16, while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven and hath burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I only am escaped to tell thee. Here's another messenger. Comes, ragged, maybe with scars and burning, whatever. Says, let me tell you what just happened. Whew. Fire of God fell and burned up the sheep. How many sheep? 7,000 sheep? Boy, that was some fire. So we got a second messenger came, right? Verse 17. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone am here to tell thee. Camels were the most prized animals in that part of the world. The Chaldeans were fierce, marauding inhabitants of Mesopotamia, probably from the north. In contrast to Sabians, which came from the south, these came from the north, but that's just details. Pretty rough, isn't it? Verse 18, we're not through. Satan doesn't waste any time. He's got his license. Boy, he runs with it. Verse 18, while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. You think you've had a bad day? Can you try? It's serious. Don't get lost in the poetry of the thing, but 4 messengers coming probably from 4 different directions saying, by the way, catastrophe is falling. You're wiped out, fella. The Dow has gone to 0, You have nothing. And by the way, your 7 sons and 3 daughters are history. It's interesting how Satan seems to have control over natural forces. Do you remember when Jesus was on the boat on Galilee and there was a storm that was so bad that the disciples thought they were going to perish? Now, these disciples were not landlubbers. These were guys that were in a partnership in a fishing business on those very waters. They'd been there. They knew what was all about, and they were terrified. I suggest to you that storm in the Gospels is not a natural storm. And it's interesting. What does Jesus do? He rebukes the storm. He rebukes it. That's an interesting use of phrase. Well, we're down to verse 20. And Job arose and rent his mantle. He tore his clothes. That's a very Jewish thing to do. Tear your clothes. Job rose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground. And what did he do? What did he do? He worshipped. Really? Shaving the head, of course, was a classic form of mourning rituals in Mesopotamia and Canaan. And because of its heathen associations, it was forbidden by law in so forth. But that was later on. This is the first chapter of Job. The next time you have a bad day, the next time you think you've got some bad news and you think you're kind of down, read Job 1. Read Job 1 and follow his example. He worshipped. The next time the malignancy of Satan goes to the limit, take comfort in the fact that whatever that limit is one that God set, and he will not set that which you can't bear. Scripture promises us that. There's far deeper significance in the book of Job, far deeper reasons for God's permission of tragedy than the ones we usually think of. I could give you a list of 10. We do that when we go through the book of Romans. Why do Christians have trial? There's 10 reasons. They're all good ones. There's probably more yet. Primarily the revelation of the mercy and compassion of God. It's interesting, Job, at least so far, has no complaints. C.S. Lewis made a great crack. They asked him, why should the righteous suffer? What was his answer? Why not? They're the only ones that can handle it. Isn't that neat? I love that. That's typical. That's vintage C.S. Lewis. Verse 21. Notice what Job's reaction to all this is. I think this is, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. I don't think he means he's going to return to the womb. I think you get the get. When naked came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The mother here, by the way, don't run with this, but implicitly is the earth. In other words, it's not his mother like coming out of the womb. In that sense, he's using the mother's womb as an idiom that he came out of dust. Dust I've come and dust I'll return. That's sort of the gist of what he's saying. Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What he's saying is, I recognize God's sovereign right to do with me as he will. You know, that's an easy thing to say because you can't change it if you wanted to. You know, if it's inevitable, relax. The key point is he didn't charge God with doing wrong. He didn't curse. And interestingly, he didn't even curse the mechanisms by which these troubles came. He didn't curse the desert brigands. He didn't curse the frontier guards that were supposed to protect his things. He didn't curse the architect that built the house so poorly that killed all his kids. Was he upset? I have to assume he was, but he didn't charge God with wrong. His amazing response, and I submit there's probably no one in this room that would argue they would have done as well as Job did. He did better than I would have. I would have grumbled, I can assure you. I may repent of it later, but I would have grumbled. That happens to me frequently, and I don't have any problems like this guy did. Job's amazing response proved that Satan was wrong. You got the picture? Satan said, if you take his stuff, he's going to curse you. He didn't. He let him take it. He didn't. See, Satan's premise was that man couldn't be godly without material gain, and here's a disproof. This man was godly apart from his material gain, loss thereof. And again, this mother's womb thing in Psalm 139, Ecclesiastes 5, and Ecclesiastes 12, you'll find that idiom used just of the earth. I don't want to get into the Gaia thing, don't misunderstand me, but anyway. It really speaks to the dust of the ground, like in Genesis 2 and 3 and Job 10 and 24. We'll see more of that as we go. Verse 22. We're going to make this. Good. In all this, notice what the word of God says. In all this, Job sinned not, nor did he charge God foolishly. He passed the test. God was vindicated. And the question you have to think about on your way home tonight is, how would you have done? Don't ask me. I know I would have failed it badly. See, if Satan had his way, every one of us would be in this kind of difficulty. The reason you're not is because God hasn't permitted it. 1 Corinthians 10:13, God will not test you above that you're able to bear. What a precious commitment from the Holy Word of God to each one of us. Dr. Francis Schaeffer pointed out that the first argument of the gospel is not that Jesus died for your sins. That's what he said. Francis Schaeffer said. I didn't say it. Francis Schaeffer said. First argument of the gospel is not that Jesus died for our sins, nor that God loves us and has a wonderful plan for our lives. I'm not saying that isn't true. That's not the first principle, the first step. You know what the first argument of the gospel is? That God is there. That God is there. You can't do any of that until he's there. You understand? God is there. God is real. God really does have a hedge about you. God really is in control. There is a God, and he is in control. You start there, and all the rest builds on that. And that's what this book's all about. The book of Job. Fabulous, fabulous book. Fabulous book. Now, relax. We've gone one chapter in one evening, and this is a 42-chapter book. If this was a seminary class or something, we might go through it verse by verse all the way through, and so on. But I'm not going to drag you kicking and screaming through the book of Job verse by verse. As we usually do with most of the books, we go verse by verse, chapter a week. That's been our style for 30 years. We will try to cluster somewhat. Now, for next time, we will, of course, take chapter 2, but I encourage you just to read ahead a bit. And I won't try to predict exactly how far we'll get next time, but I can assure you it'll be more than just we're not going to go a chapter. We'll do. We're going to start picking up some speed here. In a sense, there's sort of three sections: the front end, the back end. There are these then there's these discourses with the three friends. We'll go through those. There's Elihu. There's a strange guy that shows up, and that's the subject of a great deal of conjecture as to what that's all about. But finally, God shows up and answers the three guys on Job's behalf, sets their clock for them, and then gives Job a science quiz. That's my favorite part of the book. And there's a conclusion and a surprise at the end. And the surprise at the end, I especially treasure for some reasons I'll read it when we get there. But the book of Job, we hope to, just so you get a feeling for what we're going to be doing here, we'll be trying to do the book of Job in about 8 evenings. That doesn't mean we're going to go 5 chapters at a time. We're going to do it a little differently. But we're going to try. I'm going to try. If I fail, we'll extend it a little bit. But I'm going to try to do it in 8 evenings, because that way it's manageable. Because I want to give you enough handle on it so you can plunge on your own through. See, our ministry is based on 2 basic presuppositions. The first, you've heard me talk 1,000 times, that this is an integrated design. 66 books penned by 40 guys over thousands of years. And yet it's an integrated message which has its origin from outside the dimensionality of time. You can prove all that. That's our basic premise in this mystery. But there's a second premise, and that is that you can understand it. Our premise is that you are capable of understanding the Bible on your own, not by something somebody tells you. Luke warned you. Don't believe anything in Acts 17:11, he says, don't believe anything Chuck Missler tells you. But receive the word of, be like the Bereans, receive the word of God with all openness of mind, but search the scriptures today to prove whether those things be so. You can do it for yourself. You shouldn't be dependent upon a leader. Learn from him, yes, but you want your goal is your own direct understanding from his word. And that is what this is. Those are the 2 basic premises. Well, we're in the book of Job.
That ended abruptly. Weird. Okay, well, yes, well, it probably continues tomorrow. We can play more. We've got 51 minutes. That'll take us right to the top of the hour. Let's do that. Let's play this one because it'll cover what we played today. And it'll take us right to the top of the hour, and we can start the RSBN feed on your alley. And
we're in the second session, and we're going to springboard off chapter 2 and see if we can't get all the way to chapter 5. Last, in our introductory session, we talked about the basic book, the oldest, clearly the oldest book in the Bible. It's one that's widely misunderstood, and we'll try to glean from it the real lessons that God has for us here. In chapter 1, we saw, it opened up with Job and his prosperity. Here's a guy that was probably, we're dealing with the time of Abraham roughly, and probably in the area of northwestern Arabia, Edom, and that part of the world. Job we saw him in his prosperity, very wealthy, very powerful man. But we also saw this strange confrontation between God and Satan, where God says, Satan, have you looked at my servant Job? And he says, and God gives him an A on his report card. He's blameless. That doesn't mean sinless, but he deals with a sin. In other words, he's right with God. Satan, in fact, says, well, of course he is. He's so prosperous. Take away his possessions, and of course he'll have a whole different attitude. So God says, okay, you can do that. And so Satan does. And the greatest calamities fall upon Job. He loses his kids, he loses his wealth, and it's a very, very disturbing thing. Now, as we go through the book of Job, let's remember that Job didn't have the benefit of that conversation that we understand from reading chapter 1. All he knows is that the house came down, so to speak, literally on his kids, killed them all 10 of them, 7 sons and 3 daughters. We also we learn a lot about Satan in chapter 1. Satan's accountable to God. Let's remember that. It's not a dualism. He is subject to and accountable to the guy that created him. And his dark mind is an open book to God. And Satan, we also learn, is behind the evils that curse the earth. And he's neither omnipresent nor omniscient. He's just a super angel. That's not the same. Don't confuse him with divinity. And in fact, Satan can do nothing without divine authorization. We also learn that God's eyes are always on his own. And that's an exciting thing. And little grandchild asked her grandpa, "Can God see me all the time?" A little worried, you know. And grandpa says, "He loves you so much he can't take his eyes off you." I like that. And that's true of you and I. In any case, that's the quick background. But Satan was allowed to take away all his possessions, but not touch him personally. And that brings us to chapter 2. Let's jump in Job chapter 2, verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God, that's this term for angels, came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. That term, Benai Elohim, it's a term used of angels. A lot of people don't really understand that, but it's very, very true, very well authenticated, both in the Old Testament, in the ancient rabbinical literature, and also in the early church. So while there's some controversies about it, I think they're not not competently. Okay. But now we're about to have round 2, as we'll see. See, God has already vindicated Job, I should say his evaluation of Job in chapter 1, but we've got round 2 coming up here. Verse 2, the Lord said unto Satan, "From whence comest thou?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it." So rhetorically, these 2 verses are very parallel to the 2 verses we encountered in chapter 1, but we're going to move on a little bit here. The Lord said unto Satan, "Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth?" That's quite a statement. "A perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. And still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause." So in other words, he gives Satan the same challenge, but adds the fact that, in round 1, Satan lost. Job acquitted himself very honorably. And he's just beginning, by the way. So the chapter 1 is a rebuttal against the premise of Satan that this whole idea that all mankind is interested in his own self-interest. That may be true for many, but not of Job. By the way, notice Satan's role is always accusing the brethren. So, he's really our accuser. He's the accuser of the brethren. And we know that what that agenda, there are a lot of people who have a ministry that starts getting obsessed with accusing the brethren. Newsletters, radio programs, whatever. And it's tragic because once you start down that path, it spirals and gets worse and worse and worse. And we need to recognize whose agenda they're advancing. Who's the accuser of the brethren? Satan. And so, not that there aren't valid criticisms within the body, but they're to be dealt with in private. I'll check their Bible. I think it's still in Matthew 18. It's right in there. Take a look. But anyway, let's move on. Verse 4. And Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath, he will give for his life." Skin for skin, that's a strange phrase. I think we get the flavor of it, though. It's a proverbial saying, as if bartering for an animal. Skin for skin. What Satan's saying is you didn't let me really touch him. You just let me touch his possessions. Possessions, his family, and all the thousands of camel, all his herds. It was enormous. But still, Satan challenges God. He says, "Put forth thy hand now and touch his bone and flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face." That's Satan's prediction. See, Satan's asking for a change of rules. He's lost round 1. Now he wants the rules changed. I'm somehow reminded of something my dad told me. Never waste your time on a good loser, So we'll see what goes on here. Anyway, a flesh and bone, you see. That phrase, of course, refers to our humanity. It's emotional as well as physical, by the way. But it's interesting that this is the same expression Jesus used after his resurrection. Remember that night in the upper room in Luke 24? Handle me and see. They thought he saw it was a ghost. No, handle me and see. A spirit does not have what? Flesh and bone. Not flesh and blood, flesh and bone. Blood didn't shed. Flesh and bone. Now, as we go through this, realize, of course, that Job has no awareness of this, what was going on behind the scenes with Satan. And by the way, remember that. Remember that. Because you don't have any knowledge either what's going on behind the scenes. Job's going to get clobbered. He's been clobbered. He's going to get worse. And most of the book are dialogues about that we're going to get into. But remember that we have the benefit as observers of an insight Job didn't have. He had to just trust God. And he does. Verse 6, and the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. In other words, you can do everything but kill him. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord, smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. The commentaries are full of conjectures as to what it was that he really had. Some say a form of leprosy, some say an elephantiasis, whatever that is. And there's a whole bunch of about 7 or 8 other conjectures that I can't pronounce properly, so I'll spare you that. Sore boils is the way it's translated. They're very similar to the plagues in Egypt in Exodus 9, also in Deuteronomy 28. Hezekiah had some kind of illness similar to this apparently in 2 Kings 20, but nothing like Job's, because if you go through the book of Job's and extract all the allusions to his illness, you get quite a list. Because in verse 7, he's going to end up with inflamed ulcerous sores. In verse 8, they're itching. In verse 7 and 12, they're degenerative changes in his facial skin. He has a loss of appetite in chapter 3. He has depression, nightmares, worms and boils, hardened skin and running sores in chapter 7, difficulty in breathing, chapter 9, dark eyelids, failing vision, foul breath, rotting teeth, loss of weight, anorexia, continual pain, restlessness, peeling, blackened skin, fever. And this all lasted for at least several months. And all the lists and the references will be in the notes, but you get the idea. So you thought you had problems? By the way, the good news is Satan does not appear after this verse. We're through with him now. We've got the context set. From now on, we're going to focus on some of these issues. Verse 8 and 9, he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal. He sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. Husbands do often draw emotional strength from their wives, in fact, more than they probably realize. So this would seem on the face of it disheartening, but it must be admitted in the translation, we can't really tell what she's proposing, and even less what her motive was. In the Septuagint, there's an expansion which represents her not unfavorably as sharing Job's misery, so that her motive in wishing him dead was to end his unendurable suffering speedily. In other words, it was almost a comment of mercy, not the way it comes across in the translation to us. The word is actually blessed, but it's done with sarcasm. So curse God and die is the way you find it in the English, but it may not be quite as brutal as it first sounds. There's more to it than that. But verse 10, but he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? See, in all this, did not Job sin with his lips? Now, that's pretty impressive already. I know I wouldn't have handled it that way, By the way, he didn't call her a foolish woman. He said he spoke as one of the foolish women. So, again, the tension may not be as big as it sounds at first. See, Job's saying, we're not here to have a good time. There are meaningful objectives to be attained in this life, even when it all seems to turn sour. When pressure comes, and life is no longer fun, life is still worth living, is his point. A philosophy that wants to abandon everything as soon as things become unpleasant is a shallow, distorted view of life. Now, Job did not sin, so the score now is 2-0 in favor of Job and God against Satan. Okay? See, if Satan had his way, we would all perish, but God said you couldn't take his life. Well, he brought him right up to the edge. And we always want to remember that God assures us that we'll never experience more than we can handle. And Job proved that. And he's teaching us our limits. You say, well, gee, Satan really had at him. He wiped out his flocks and his herds. He wiped out his family, all his possessions. Now he's taken away his health. Remember on Wall Street, they say if the biggest problem is money, you're in good shape. Because, you can always get more money. Health is a scary thing to lose, as I'm sure you're all sensitive to. But Satan's not through. He doesn't appear in the text, but in effect, there are 3 guys that show up that are the worst of all the things that happened to Job. These 3 guys are bad news. They're his friends. They are his friends. They come to mourn him. But as they often quip here, if you have friends like that, you don't need enemies. This is Satan's final stronghold, the spirit of Job, the ultimate reality of his life. Satan's heavy artillery in the book of Job are not the tornadoes and the brigands that stole his property. It's not the boils. His heavy artillery were his religious counselors. His religious counselors do more to jeopardize Job than all the rest put together. So let's pay attention to where this goes, okay? Verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they all had an appointment together to come to mourn for him and to comfort him. I want you to notice the kind of comfort they give him. But by the way, they all came from different countries, and they were his friends. Job was an international figure, very wealthy before he lost it all, and they all came to help him, or mourn him, comfort him. Eliphaz the Temanite. I'm going to suggest we're going to call him Eliphaz the Eloquent. I'm going to give each one of these guys a nickname to help you remember the style of their attitude. Eliphaz the Eloquent. Eliphaz is an Edomite name. We see him in Genesis 36. And the Temanite was either from Tema in Arabia, as some people conjecture, or Teman in Edom. That's the one I personally favor, and there's lots of scripture verses where these things are alluded to. But Eliphaz bases his arguments that we're going to go through a whole bunch of discussion here, based on his own observation and human experience. That's Eliphaz's orientation. He really says Job is suffering because he has sinned. That's his premise. That's his assumption that undergirds his basic argument. That this is all the reason Job's in all this trouble. He obviously has some unconfessed sin in his life. Now around the office, we often joke about that. Someone will come, have a bad cold and can't keep to shake it for a few days. We say there must be some unconfessed sin in your life. But we're being facetious, of course, just doing it, just in banter. Well, we get to the second guy, Bildad the Brutal. Bildad the Shuhite. We often use that little context, who's the shortest guy in the Bible? Most people say Nehemiah is the shortest guy in the Bible. If they ever say this, no, it's Bildad the Shuhite. See? Okay. It's amazing what you can learn in these Bible studies, isn't it? Bildad the Shuhite was from Shua. It's a location probably named after Abraham's youngest son in Genesis 25. And there is a plausible identification with a place in the Middle Euphrates. It's mentioned in cuneiform text, but those are conjectures. No one's of these locations and stuff. There are a lot of scholastic conjectures. It's all suggestive evidence, nothing certain about that. But anyway, Bildad the Brutal, as I'll call him, he rests his arguments on human tradition. He simply says that Job's a hypocrite. That's what he'll say when we get to him. And the third guy is Zophar the Zealous. And he has his name is the same as Balak's father. There may be a relationship in Numbers 22 or not, we're not sure. And name possibly is a town in Judea, but we're not sure. But Zophar the Zealous, his arguments are based on the assumptions of human merit versus orthodox dogma. He simply says Job is a wicked man. All these reasonings are wrong in their conclusions and false in their logic. So God himself, by the way, is going to declare that they had, quote, darkened counsel by words without knowledge, when you get to chapter 38. Ultimately, after these discourses get thrashed around, God himself will go in the defense of Job. So there are the 3 friends. I'm going to leave on the shelf for the moment a 4th guy that will show up by the name of Elihu. And he's a man of mystery. We'll talk about him when we get there, but just realize that there are 3 friends and Elihu. When God steps in to rebut these guys, he rebuts the three friends. He doesn't comment on Elihu. Elihu is, I think, widely misunderstood. Many commentators just assume, well, he's a fourth guy, and he was wrong too. Well, maybe so. I think he's more of an intercessor than a judge, and we'll take a look at him. And he'll show up in chapter 32. And again, he's a Buzzite. May have been from Buz, which is a name of Abraham's nephew. Mentioned along with Dedan and Tema. Those are all Arabian locations, so we think we're pretty secure on the geographic assumptions here. But anyway, these three friends, when they had, verse 12, when they had lifted their eyes afar off, they knew him not. In other words, they didn't recognize Job at first. They knew him not. They lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his mantle and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. These are all classic ways to express grief and despair. They wailed, emotional shock. They wept in sorrow. They tore their robes. It's very Jewish to tear your robes when you're in brokenheartedness. And they threw dust over their heads towards heaven is a way of expressing deep grief and their helplessness. And so they handle the situation like a funeral. Job is almost there. In fact, wishes he was in a funeral before we're through. Verse 13, so they sat down with him upon the ground. How long? 7 days and nights. Wow, 7 days and 7 nights. And none spoke a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. That's actually pretty sensitive. It's amazing when someone has grief, how we want to call. Yeah, I can remember when my dad died, I was getting my mother just settled down, just beginning to deal with it, and someone would call and commiserate over the phone, and she'd get all broken up again after working. I mean, if they just would leave us alone for a few days, not, you feel you have to do something. It's amazing. Solitude is in many respects often the best healer. But anyway, 7 days was the statutory term for mourning the dead, by the way. We see that in Genesis 50, 1 Samuel 31, Ezekiel 3, and other places. Which means we got through a full chapter. That's pretty good. We're doing fine. Here's Job chapter 3. And after this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. When he says his day, it probably means his birthday, the day of his birth. Weeks may have gone by, apparently. And he's baffled, he's buffeted, tormented. Job longs for death. In this chapter, he's going to ask 3 poignant questions. First is, why was I ever born? I don't know how many of you ever have been that low. But I think many of us have gone through a period where we really, in our heart of hearts, raise that question. Verse 2, Job spake and said, or actually the Hebrew says answered, let the day perish when I was born, and the night in which it was said, this is a man-child conceived. And by the way, there are other psalms of grief that are analogous to Job 3 here, in Jeremiah 20 and Lamentations 3, but especially Psalm 22, verse 1. There was one that bellowed out like this, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Well, Jesus quotes that in Matthew 27. Anyway, verse 4, let that day be darkness, let not God regard it from above, let not the light shine upon it. Just to give you a flavor, we're just getting and the translations are not easy, by the way. Almost every major author does his own translation because the Hebrew is very difficult. But it is incredibly eloquent. There's darkness is going to be mentioned the next 5 times using 4 different words. And the verbal tapestry here is clearer in the Hebrew, of course. In all 6 lines of verses 4 and 5, they're unified by various verbal signals. Verse 5, let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify or stain or challenge it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined into the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months, or let it not rejoice among the days, another way to say it. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it, that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning, it may say in your translation. It actually says raise up their Leviathan. The word Leviathan is mentioned in 5 passages in the Scripture. Here, in chapter 41, where we will take it up and talk about it, Psalm 74, Psalm 104, and Isaiah 27. These are possible reference to dinosaurs. And we'll take that up as a topic when we get to chapter 41. Job is probably simply referring to the custom of sorcerers or enchanters who claim to have power to make a day unfortunate by rousing the dragon asleep in the sea. It's poetic license on a common idiom is what we're dealing with here. Remember, the book of Job is mostly like an opera. It has a front end and a back end that's prose. But you'll discover as we get into this, the actual rhetoric that's recorded with these discourses is incredibly eloquent. And it's almost in the end of itself in terms of the eloquence with which it's expressed. Continuing at verse 9, Job says, "Let the stars of the twilight therefore be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day." And I like the way the Hebrew says it, the eyelids of the morning. The eyelids of the... That's great. Verse 10, "Because it shut up not the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes." This is marvelous poetry. Hebrew poetry, of course. And Job's pressure, of course, is increasing, and he's beginning to crumble under it. And there's nothing harder for us to understand than unexplained trouble. It's different if you know why it happened, so it causes it. When it's just surrounding you for no apparent reason, that's the hardest to deal with. Verse 11, Job continues, "Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly?" See, the second question, why was I born then? Why didn't I die at birth? He's low. He's really down, understandably. Verse 2, "Why did the knees prevent me? Why did the breasts that I should suck?" He's saying that my life has been totally meaningless. But then he gives us a very primitive view of death that he'll revise before this book is over. Verse 13, "For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept, then I had been at rest. With kings and councils of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who filled their house with silver, or as a hidden untimely birth, I had not been as infants which never saw the light. The wicked cease from troubling, and the weary be at rest. There the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and the great are there, and the servant is free from his master." That's his concept of death. He could be at least at rest in solitude. That's what he's yearning for. Many people see death that way, time of rest, so on. There's a play called Our Town. Many of us got involved with when in high school, which deals with that sort of a perspective. Now, Job's understanding of life after death is going to need enlightenment, and he gets it before this book is over. In fact, in chapter 19 is one of the most incredible declarations of the resurrection that you'll find in the Old Testament when we get there. In fact, this may be one of the reasons this suffering comes into his life, because it really sharpens his understanding of what life is really all about. His view of death, Job's view of death, will be very different by the end of the book. Well, now we get to Job's third question, is why can't I die now? So, why was I born? Why didn't I die at birth? Why can't I die now? He's really down. That's what it boils down to. Verse 20, "Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in the soul, which long for death, but it cometh not, and dig for it more than for hid treasures." Suicide is never contemplated here. Death must be God's gift. And for Job now, this is the only possible evidence of God's goodness. If you just take me out of here. That's Job's mindset. That's his attitude. Doesn't mean he's going to kill himself. That's not in view here. It's just an expression of how desperate he is, how troubled he is. Verse 22. "Which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the waters. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came." So that's Job's declaration of how extremely troubled he is. Now come his three counselors, Eliphaz the eloquent, Bildad the brutal, and Zophar the zealous. Eliphaz is the oldest, and there's a smoothness about him, and a courtesy, at least at the beginning, that indicates he's learned how to be diplomatic, how to say unpleasant things in gracious ways. Bildad is brutal and outspoken. He's going to lay it on Job, and he doesn't care what the effect is. That's why I call him Bildad the brutal. I use that thing just to help you remember which is which. And Zophar is compassionate and emotional, but he speaks with a great deal of force trying to motivate Job. Now, these are oversimplifications. All these characters are too human to be stereotypes or caricatures. There's not some mystical structure here. These very much take the character of being real people. But our own philosophies will be echoed in their arguments. And there are at least 18 speeches on this, what I'll call a wisdom school on a dunghill. Because there they are. They're going to have this eloquent philosophical discussion. There's going to be 10 different speeches by Job, 3 by Eliphaz, 3 by Bildad, and 2 by Zophar. And it's not quite that simple, but that's just to give you a rough perspective that you can break it down a few other ways. What's going to make these discussions so provocative is it's hard to find any proposition in the book which is not, in some sense, correct. Taken in isolation. This is going to be a marvelous example of things that are really true in general, but not here. How important it's going to teach us how important it is to apply it to the right fact situation. There's not going to be any meeting of the mind in this clash of words that we're going to encounter. Job is not arguing a point. He's trying to understand his experience. There's a big difference. Big difference. He's dreadfully in earnest, and yet he's also very transparently honest. Job acquits himself quite well here. His friends will talk about God, but Job talks to God. And this makes him the only authentic theologian in the bunch. He tells God exactly how he feels and just what he thinks. And there can't be any prayers better than that. So Job's on track, even though as desperate as he is and so forth. By the way, nowhere does Job bewail the losses of chapter 1. He's reconciled to that. I don't know if I could be. He did. Lord gives, Lord takes away. I mean, okay. There's no place that he bewails the illness of chapter 2. He's upset about it, but he's in a sense reconciled. He's trying to understand why. His concern from beginning to end is with God. Not his health. Not his wealth or his health, chapter 1 to chapter 2. But his life with God. It is because he seems to have lost God that he's in such torment. The real insight to Job's anxiety is not the wealth, not the health problems, is that he fears that his relationship with God is severed. And he can't handle that. He can't handle that. Let's come up to Job. Chapters 4 and 5 constitute Eliphaz's first discourse. We're not going to relax. We're not going to go through all 18 speeches in Job. It's a 42-chapter book. We're going to try to do it in a fewer number of sessions than that. But once we'll go through Eliphaz, you'll get the flavor that pretty much characterizes the others. And we'll talk about the others subsequently. But we'll go to this. We'll actually go read through chapter 4 and 5. And Eliphaz is going to put his address in chapters 4 and 5. He'll speak again in chapter 15 and chapter 22. But his first argument breaks down into 6 main points, and when you hear them, you'll get the gist of what all the others are going to be saying through the rest of the book. Eliphaz begins by saying to Job, in fact, he's going to say, follow your own advice. Verse 1 in chapter 4. Eliphaz, the Temanite, answered and said, now notice the way he does this. He's really got courtesy here. If we essay to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking or refrain from words? In other words, do you mind, but we need to talk about this? See, you sense at least an apparent courtesy up front. He gets tougher as it goes, but at least he's starting out courteously. Verse 3, behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have beholden him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. But now it has come upon thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and uprightness of thy ways? He's saying to Job, you've been a counselor to others. To many people, you've identified the problem, and you assist other people dealing with it. Now it's your turn. You need to follow your own advice. Pretty good opener, okay? But then he goes on to define the problem, and we learn Eliphaz's basic principle of life. Verse 7, remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. See, Eliphaz's basic principle is you reap what you sow. That's certainly true in the general. Is it necessarily true here? You remember the psalmist said, Psalm 37:25, I have been young and I have been old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. But you see, Eliphaz is going too far. That's one thing in an abstract principle. It's quite another to apply it to Job's case. Eliphaz deserves the retort by Job. Job should have said something like, you haven't seen much. See, Eliphaz is relying on his own experience to generalize. Verse 9. Eliphaz continues, by the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils they are consumed. The roaring of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, the teeth of the young lions are broken, the old lion perisheth for lack of prey, and the stout lion's whelps are scattered abroad. Well, what Eliphaz's argument lacks in substance, he makes up for with rhetoric. There are no fewer than 5 different words for lion in that verse. This is incredibly eloquent Hebrew that's going on here. Eliphaz uses a pride of lions, or a family of lions, to describe the natural strength of human beings. And it appears strong, but in God's judging hand, it's broken. See, the argument is that the righteous are never punished, and only the unrighteous suffer. That's Eliphaz's basic premise. And in fact, he says, where did you ever see an innocent man perish? Where did you ever see an unrighteous man succeed, is the question he's begging. And of course, he concludes that Job's problem is caused by his own sin. Something he's hiding, something he isn't admitting. He said, in other words, Job, if you'll admit what's wrong with the sin, then everything's going to be all right. Well, that's a principle that needs to be re-examined. You remember in John 9, Jesus said, they asked Jesus, the disciples, the blind, who sinned, this man or his parents? Remember? Well, it was in this case for the glory of God. But remember Moses in Midian? He was 40 years in Midian, married to Yvonne DiCarlo all those years. And David in his hideout from Saul. Both Jeremiah and Joseph were in a pit. Did they deserve to be? Daniel was in the lion's den. Did he deserve to be? Was he there because he did something wrong? Hardly. He was there because he did something right. Paul was in prison more than once. Was it because he did something wrong? Was it sin that put him in that kind of a situation? Here's Job in the city dump, same situation. All the heroes of Hebrews 11, we go through what some people call the Hall of Faith. All those people, all the sawed in half and all those different things going on. What? Because they were wrong? It's because they were right. So it's not that simple. And of course, the ultimate example is Jesus. Jesus was the innocent one to suffer for all of us. Anyway, Eliphaz goes on to tell Job that if he will fear God and confess his sins, everything's going to be all right. Eliphaz apparently recognized that relying on his own experiences, it makes him a little vulnerable, so now he's going to fall back on a claim of divine revelation. I have a prophecy. No, sorry. Okay. It's going to be very similar to what happens to Balaam in Numbers 24, but let's move on here. He's going to break down his message in 2 parts, and first he's going to refer to a night vision that came to him. It's going to get kind of spooky here. So hang on, verse 12 to 15 is pretty spooky. Verse 12, Eliphaz, speaking to Job, now a thing was secretly brought to me, and mine ear received a little thereof. In other words, by stealth in the Hebrew. In thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth on men, fear came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face, and the hair of my flesh stood up. The word here is ruach, which also can mean wind, but it's very strange. It's usually in the feminine. Here it's used with masculine verbs. His stood, his appearance, so forth. It's clear that what's intended to communicate is the Spirit of God, not just wind. By the way, the same thing happens in the Greek in 2 Thessalonians with the restrainer. It's a neuter, and yet it's used in a masculine way, and so forth. It's a hint that it's the Holy Spirit. But anyway, that's what he's intending to communicate here. Verse 16, it stood still, and I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes, and there was silence, and I heard a voice saying. In fact, it says, I heard a still small voice. Verse 17, shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his maker? Now this banality, if you will, makes Eliphaz sound pretentious. And it's really quite unfair. Job hasn't questioned the ways of God. He hasn't claimed to be better than God. All he's done is proclaim his misery. But Eliphaz has taken this, in that direction. Verse 18, behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charged with folly. How much less in them that dwell in houses of clay, whose foundations in the dust, which are crushed before the moth. They are destroyed from morning to evening. They perish forever without regarding it. They actually destroyed it. It's beaten in pieces, is what he says. But anyway, doth not their excellency which is in them go away? They die, even without wisdom. This whole argument is based on the fact that infinite justice rules the universe. You can't argue with that. God is holy and pure. So, and what chance would a man who's to have to stand before him and claim to be sinless? This is good theology, it would seem. Even Socrates understood this when he declared, perhaps deity can forgive sins, but I don't see how. That's a profound insight into the justice of God. And we're going to see before the end of this book that this was a problem that Job himself was indeed facing. He did not understand his own heart, and so confesses at the end. But the problem with Eliphaz's argument is that he sees God only as a God of justice. See, God is a God of justice. What he's saying is true, but it's only part of the story, only part of the fact. How often we come to an erroneous judgment, even in human affairs, when we only have half the facts. And Eliphaz sees nothing of God's love, compassion, or forgiveness. He has no grasp of discipline or training from the Father's hand. It's a whole different concept. See, because he's got an unbalanced theology, that his truth becomes false in its application. You can take something that's true and misapply it, is the point. How we need to understand that. See, this is why many people will take partial truths and end up in error. Charles Spurgeon spoke about preachers who went about with a theological revolver in their ecclesiastical trousers. Eliphaz continues to argue that trouble comes only from sin. But the gulf between Job and his friends is beginning to open up. And Job's position is more audacious, believing more believing in effect in God than Eliphaz's insipid insinuations. And he's not going to be reminded, he's not going to be silenced by reminders that it is not for a puny man to question the ways of Almighty. Job's questions may be unanswerable, but he will ask them, and he will insist upon his right to ask them before it's over. Let's get through chapter 5, verse 1. Eliphaz continues, call now, if there be any that will answer thee, and to which of the saints wilt thou turn? For wrath killeth the foolish man, and envy slayeth the silly one. See, that's what he's saying. In effect, that's really what's wrong. You're vexed and jealous, and that's why you have trouble. Verse 3, Eliphaz says, I have seen the foolish taking root, but suddenly I cursed his habitation. His children are far from safety, and they are crushed in the gate. Neither is there any to deliver them. Now, this is a nasty blow by Eliphaz. This is a hidden reference to the calamity that took place in chapter 1, when the roof fell down and killed all of Job's 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. Eliphaz is suggesting that such things can only happen when there's something wrong in Job's life. He's blaming Job for the killing of his children. You can imagine that Job's getting a bellyful of the comfort he's getting from Eliphaz. Huh? Verse 5, continue. Whose harvest the hungry eateth up, and taketh it even out of thorns, and the robbers swalloweth up their substance. And although affliction cometh not forth of the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground, yet man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upward. Or the Hebrews are the sons of burning coal lift up the sky. Have you ever seen a fire? You've seen the sparks go up. Well, he's saying that man is born to trouble just as the sparks fly upward. And trouble comes from sin, and if you've got trouble, sin has to be the reason. Stop and think. Do you see the logical error there? Trouble comes from sin. So if you have trouble, sin has to be the reason. You see the logical error? See? Trouble comes from sin, but trouble can come from lots of other places too. Follow me? So in fact, you may have trouble. Sin could be one of the possibilities. There are others. But that's the logical, see, this is one of the more conspicuous logical fallacies here. Now, the next section, Eliphaz is going to make the point that there's no playing games with God because God knows too much. He's got all the facts. That's basically it here. So what he's going to say is true. He's just misapplying it. Verse 8. Eliphaz says, I would seek unto God, and unto God would I commit my cause, which doeth great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number, who giveth rain upon the earth and sendeth waters upon the fields, to set upon high those that be low, and that those that mourn should be exalted to safety. He disappointeth the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the froward is carried headlong. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope in the noonday as the night. And he saveth the poor from the sword, and from the mouth, and from the hand of the mighty, so that the poor hath hope, and iniquity stoppeth her mouth. This is one of the most beautiful creedal hymns in the Bible. It simply says God is in control, and that he's so clever and wise that you cannot deceive him. Just give up and get it out into the open, and God will bless you. That's sort of the thrust of Eliphaz's argument here. Verse 17, behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. Well, boy, this all sounds familiar. Psalm 94:12, Proverbs 3:11, Hebrews 12:5. That's going to be the point that Elihu makes when you get to Job 36, but we get ahead of ourselves. But Eliphaz continues in verse 18, for he maketh sore, he bindeth up, he woundeth, his hands make whole. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 shall no evil touch thee. In famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of the destruction when it cometh. At destruction and famine thou shalt laugh, neither shalt thou be afraid of the beasts of the earth. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with thee, and thou shalt know that thy tabernacle shall be in peace, and thou shalt visit thy habitation, and shalt not sin. Well, anyway, in view of Job's loss of property and family, Eliphaz's bumbling on here is understandably infuriating Job. He's going to have his response in chapter 6 and 7. Verse 25, thou shalt know also that thy seed shall be great, thy offspring as the grass of the earth, and so on. You know, it's here. Verse 25 is promising you the good news is going to have great seed. You know, this promise of numerous descendants can hardly comfort someone who has just been rendered childless. These guys are incredibly insensitive to the situation Job's facing. Verse 26, thou shalt come to thy grave in a full age, like a shock of corn cometh in a season. Lo, this we have searched it, and so it is. Hear it, know it, for thy good. Delitzsch, one of the great commentators in the Old Testament, points out that, quote, the skill of the poet is proved by the difficulty which the expositor has in detecting that which is false in the speech of Eliphaz. In other words, you can go through his speech very carefully, and you can't find a proposition that isn't really true, but it's just misapplied. Doesn't fit Job's situation. See, there's good theology, but it's not taking in all the facts. And the Lord himself is going to single out Eliphaz in making this error when we get to chapter 42, which is the concluding chapter. Anyone that's been around a while knows that it's possible to find godly people who have not been protected, who still will go through times of trial and peril and suffering. Job has no quarrel with the statements of highlighting the power and justice of God. This issue just doesn't fit his case. He has long ago learned that he has to view his good life not as a reward. And so it's like a gift and not a reward. It's a gift, not a reward. So he has no complaint when it's removed. That's been Job's attitude in the beginning, and he sustains that attitude. But Job's highest wisdom is to love God for God alone. He loves God for himself alone, not because of what he gets out of it. And so Eliphaz's words are, rather than a comfort, they're really a trap. Job is being tested the same way Abraham was being tested in Genesis 22. And Abraham's testing, like Job's, was neither punitive, like for a sinner, nor is it corrective for the saint. It's a different kind of a test. Do you trust me? Is what God is saying. And Abraham did. And Job, in his own way, will also. But no thanks to these characters that he's surrounded with. This story, I believe, in part is given to us that we might learn to correct our theology and understand that there are deeper reasons for suffering than sin. Now, Job's speeches are going to face this reality far more courageously than those of his friends. The vindication of goodness, God's or man's, lies beyond ultimate testing and death, when the victory of resurrection proves the indestructibility of the good life. And the best example is the cross. The darkest mystery of human agony will be embraced by God himself and be transformed into from moral outrage into glory. When the victim is the willing sin bearer, his suffering becomes the conquest of evil and the display and proof that God is love. That suffering by God himself will be the ultimate display of love. That's really what it's all about. People often say, what's it all for? Why did God make man? He knew he was going to sin, and so on and so forth. Ephesians 2:7 is your answer to that. We always quote Ephesians 2:8 and 9. For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. Even faith is a gift, that no flesh should boast. It's the verse before that gives you the clue. Why does God do all this? So that in ages yet to come, he can manifest his glory in his riches in Christ Jesus. It's God's incredible achievement. Well, anyway, Eliphaz's comfort that we've experienced in the last two chapters raises Job's torment even a higher pitch. Job's loss of certainty about God's goodness is a poverty and a pain that's more desolating than any of his, or I should say all of his other troubles. All his poverty, all his pain is less than his loss of certainty about God's goodness. See, everything else may go, but God has to remain. So it's this threat to his faith, not his running sores, that becomes the utmost hurt in his mind. The friendship of God is all that matters now. And that's going to declare that in chapter 29 when we get there. Now, we've managed to get through quite a handful here. Job's reply will come in chapters 6 and 7. He'll reply to all of this. In chapter 6, he's going to rebuke his friends, not just Eliphaz, all three of them. And chapter 7, he's going to address his complaint directly to God. And so we'll see how far we can get through. We're not going to go verse by verse through all the discourses. Relax. I wanted to go through Eliphaz's because it's sort of foundational, and it gives you a flavor of what's going on here. And we'll try to lay out the essence of the other discourses and dialogues that are going on. But understand that Job's not trying to prove a point. He's trying to understand the experience. There's a big difference there. There's between the two. Now, not all of Job, I should say, there are some other discoveries that we're going to make as we go that emerge in these discussions. There are more scientific comments in the book of Job than probably any other book in the Bible. There's more, there are at least 15 specific anticipations of scientific breakthroughs that are alluded to here in Job. We're going to discover that there are more comments on creation in the book of Job than anywhere else in the Bible. We're also going to notice in all of these things there are no fallacies, no errors. We'll talk a little bit about that before we're all through. So the book of Job. Superficially, people say, well, the book of Job's all about why do the innocent suffer. No, That is an issue, but it's not the primary issue. And it's that God is in control, and there's a handful of other lessons. We highlighted some of those in our first session, and we'll recommit those as we go through. Book of Job. What you might do for next time is read ahead. Read chapters 6 and 7 for sure, and in theory at least, in the next couple of sessions, we'll want to go all the way through to chapter 31. 32 is a change of scene, and what happens subsequently will be different. But the next couple of dozen chapters are discourses between these guys, making a statement to Job and Job replying. You can skim through that for next time if you can. Let's stand for a closing word of prayer. Anytime you think you've got problems, it's worthwhile jumping in at least the first few chapters of the book of Job, because there's incredible issues there, but there's also some astonishing encouragement forthcoming. We'll be well rewarded for our diligence to hang in there through this book. Well, we're exploring